supposed to put the right name
In the right spot, yes.
Yeah, scoot on over, thank you. Okay, good evening and welcome. Let's call to order and begin the Issaquah City Council Committee of the Whole meeting for Tuesday, September 23rd. And we have a full agenda item and a wonderful audience here to participate in the entire process. Tonight on the agenda, we're starting off with a Human Services Commission update, followed by the Bike and Ped Plan Action Strategy. We'll talk about the tourism plan. Then in the Economic Vitality Commission, we'll get a report. And then we'll get a report on rental facilities. And then we'll go into regional and reports on regional activities and issues. And there will be an executive session tonight after the public meeting. So up first is, first on the agenda, Human Services Commission update presented by David Fujimoto, our Director of the Sustainability Department. And are you going to have a co-presenter this evening, David?
I will. Maggie Baker, who's the immediate past chair of the Human Services Commission, will be joining me up here tonight. Can you hear me?
Zach, can everybody hear David okay?
Okay.
You're good.
Great. Thank you very much. I'm going to be quick because I know you, as Paul mentioned, you do have a very full agenda. We want to come and join you here today. We have a number of members of our Human Services Commission here in our audience today. We actually have, the group has a meeting this evening as well, so I want to thank them for taking the time to come here to provide a quick update to the council. They're in the midst of deliberations for the next cycle of grants, which start in 2015 and go through 2016. So I wanted to thank them for coming. We wanted to give you, the commission wanted to give a quick update on where they're at and some of their approach for assessing the grants process going forward. So I wanted to invite Maggie Baker, who is the past chair of the commission, to come up here and share a little bit of information about the continuum of care, which I believe is also in your packet.
Thank you, David. Good evening. Thank you for putting us on your agenda. And I'd also like to thank the members of the Human Services Commission. So if you could all raise your hands so everybody knows who you are. That's great. Okay. So I'm going to start with a brief overview of one of the tools that we use to think about our human services portfolio. And you can't read what's up here, but you do have a paper copy, I believe, or you should have had one. And first I'd like to tell you that this all started a few years ago when we invited the City of Bellevue's Human Services personnel, experts, to come and to present to the Human Services Commission. And in particular, I remember a handout that Alex O'Reilly gave us, and it was on a blue sheet of paper. I'll never forget it. It had just one single bidirectional arrow on it, and she was talking about the human services continuum. So as I brought that home and started thinking about, we talked about it in our meeting, and then when I brought it home and started thinking about that in terms of all the grants that we were evaluating, I thought, what would this look like if we understood where all of the requests that we get stand on some type of a human services continuum. So this, just looking at this, the continuum is read from top to bottom and from left to right. So when you read it from left to right, what I did was, and I was just first of all just drawing this out on paper, and eventually I got to the point of putting it into a PowerPoint. But if you go from left to right, it goes from the ages of 0 to 100 plus, so it goes across the age continuum. And then from top to bottom, it goes from prevention to crisis at the bottom in red. So prevention is green, and then it transitions into a section that I unscientifically called rehabilitation and support services, and then down at the bottom is where our safety net or our crisis services are. So in thinking about the applications, where did they fall on the continuum, I just mapped out the applications that we got that year. Now, so this was around 2012, 2012-13 as we evaluated applications for the 13-14 funding cycle. And so at the top on the left, you can see, well, you can't see, but if you looked at your copy, you would see that on the left, to the far left, around 0 to 3, are agencies like Kindering and the Pediatric Intensive Care Center, or I forget the exact name of it. But then, you know, as we moved down, we started seeing things that went more across the lifespan. So, for example, at the top, and these were all kind of in some unscientific order of severity or need. And so at the top might be life enrichment options in the Issaquah Parks and Recreation Specialized Recreation Program. And then toward the bottom, as you get down toward the red, were things where people were either homeless or on the verge of homelessness or trying to work their way out. But toward the bottom here was more severity. And then in the red section is where we had our true safety net services, our crisis lines, our rape response services, and those types of things. So, you know, when I first brought this back and presented it to my colleagues, it was in very rough form, but they really engaged with it. And Paul was our chair at the time, and he found it quite interesting, as well as everybody else. And, you know, we, as a group, kind of improved this and kind of honed it so that how can we think about our human services portfolio in the city of Issaquah? How does it compare to other human services portfolios? And so the one thing is that on the columns on the right, I put what the request was and what we ended up funding. So whatever's in gray, we chose that year not to fund it. But then as we moved to the right, I put the percentages of the portfolio so that about 16% is in prevention, about 14% in crisis, and everything else was in between. So before I go on, let me tell you what this is not. This is not scientific, it's not perfect or even close to it. And the biggest limitation is that this only shows, agencies and services based on the applications we received. So first of all, it obviously doesn't show anything if we did not receive an application to fund something. So all of that's missing. And then as you look across the top, you're thinking, well, where are all the preventive services for example, older adults? And we would not have gotten, or might not have gotten, an application for a fall prevention program, because that might be handled at the county or the state or the federal level with all of the fall prevention programs that are funded. So there are a lot of limitations to this, but the value is that it does help us think about our portfolio. And I was talking with our chair, Bill Ramos, tonight, and it also helps us, after we evaluate each and every application on its own, it helps us to, then I produce one of these, because I haven't done this year's yet. And I do one of these, and then it helps us to see where we are thinking about funding across the lifespan and across the continuum from prevention to crisis, and then where we might want to shore something up or where we think we might have some duplication and perhaps not want to fund that. So I think the last thing that this raises is, if there were an ideal human services portfolio that you could fund out of the city of Issaquah, and if we did that in the context of everything else that's funded on the county, state, and federal level, what would be an ideal human services portfolio? And if we had a complete one, if we ever had, you know, some funding to do such a thing, that we could look to make sure that we've covered ourselves across the lifespan and then across the continuum of services. So this is a very rudimentary model and tool, but it does help us to reflect on what we're doing. And Sophie, would you hold up your book of all the grant applications? This is what we're evaluating. No, sideways so everybody can see. This is this is the amount of information we're processing now this year. And so you can imagine that, as we're working on each individual application, it's also useful to be able to pull back and take a broader look at what it is we might be doing. And so I don't know, does anybody on the commission have anything else to add? Okay, so does anybody have any questions?
Are there any questions for Maggie from the council? Go ahead.
Well, we noticed over here that we didn't have the columns on the right in our packet. Mm-hmm. We only had the items in the middle. So if you want to share those, be happy to see them. It'd be interesting.
Sure. David, you can.
I think I realized that this chart has a little bit more detail, and it has basically just the funding recommendations from the last round. So we didn't include that because it's older data, but wanted to primarily talk about the framework itself. So,
Mary Lou?
I've never seen that kind of graphic before, but I really like it. I didn't quite understand it before I heard your explanation. Now I do. I'm just wondering if there are another couple of pieces of information that would help. Like, for example, we're being asked for a certain amount of money, but what percentage of that is the overall operating budget for an association? Like, are we funding 10% of what they do or 20? And then a side note to that would be, and how many people do they serve in a year? 50 or 1,000 or whatever it is. But I thought the story that it told was great. I really like it.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a real, it's kind of a snapshot, if you will, of what we're doing and how we might want to think about in moving in the future. What we might, if we were ever to suggest or seek out applications saying that we don't think we've got enough coverage here, it can help with that. And the other thing is there's a question about, it's the right thing to do to fund prevention, but how much prevention do you want to fund given that people may not stay in your city, right? And that's always the question about, for a lot of healthcare organizations, insurers, like how much do we want to put into prevention if people are just going to move away or out of the system, and then we have paid for that. So it's more of a collective attitude about, we want to do prevention because it's the right thing, and that society will have a return on investment with that. For example, we don't fund the Nurse Family Partnership. That's funded at the county, state, federal levels and things like that. But I think that for every dollar that's put into the Nurse Family Partnership, which does home visiting, registered nurses doing home visiting for mother-baby dyads that are at risk, they get a $17 return on investment for every dollar they put in. And that extends out to the teenage years when they've got 20, 25 years of science behind this, where the children who were served by the Nurse Family Partnership early on in life, those children end up having statistically significantly less involvement with the criminal justice system, as well as other positive outcomes. So that's not something we would fund here, but for example, the stuff that Encompass Northwest is doing, that's an evidence-based preventive intervention. So the more, if we could get access to more evidence-based preventive interventions and invest in that at the city, county, state level, would we want to do that? Would we want to move in that direction for the collective good? So it's just something to think about.
Tola.
Thank you. I have a question. So are we seeing, as the funding at the state and county levels continue to get pressured, I know that we were particularly concerned about seeing an increase in need and an increase in activity at the municipal level. Are we seeing that in initial trending in terms of the applications that we're seeing this year as compared to previous years?
I don't know if Bill's saying, he's nodding his head yes. I think that every year, those of us who've been on it for a while, I think every year we've seen an increase in need, and every year, every funding cycle, and even in the non-funding years, we bring in agencies to talk with us about what's happening, give us an update, or if you're new, tell us what you're doing. And threaded throughout all of these applications, we're seeing increased need. And many of them talk about the funding cuts at levels that used to cover that. It's very concerning.
And if I can add to that, in 2010, when I was on the commission, we saw it then. We saw applications that were requesting more from municipalities for funding at a greater ratios because of reductions from federal, state, and other sources. So I think the trend's been going on, and it's not only in the ones that apply at the municipality level. Certainly those at the federal funding for housing are seeing similar. There's goals to get back to 2011 levels of funding just for housing. So it's hitting all the agencies across the board.
Mm-hmm. There's also the question of if we could get to some of the root causes of a lot of our other problems like domestic violence, would we want to invest more in that because of its effect on homelessness and child abuse and, this, that, and the other thing, plus all the stuff that we're not funding through human services like, police and all of those other things. But yeah.
So you're going to be using this as a guide. You are going through your exercise now.
Yes.
And you'll be completing that soon.
Yes.
And we'll be hearing about that in October, November timeframe, your recommendations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, whatever time frame it is that we have to hit, we're hitting it. As a matter of fact, we'll be probably deliberating a little longer this evening than normal.
Right. So there's a few more meetings that the commission has set up to wrap up their deliberations by, I believe it's the third week of October. So that's coming soon.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you very much, Maggie, for that presentation. Thank you to everybody from the commission for coming here this evening.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, and I know you have a meeting to go to, but if you want to hear about the bike ped plan or tourism, you're welcome to stay.
We'll get the feed over there. We'll turn it on.
Okay, thanks so much.
All right, thank you.
So next on the agenda is presented here. My gosh, David's back. I think we're going to get. I think this is the first time that the full council is going to get a presentation on the completed master bike and ped plan, if I remember that. Is that correct, David?
I believe that's
yes. Okay. So this was actually an outgrowth of a council goal from 2012. I think that's when it was adopted, and a lot of the work David and his team started putting into it last year and completed this year. So it's all yours.
All right, thank you very much. Can you guys hear me? So thank you for having us here tonight. As Paul, Councilmember Winterstein mentioned, this was a goal that was adopted in 2012 for 2013, and the work is carried through 2014 in a variety of ways, which we'll talk about as we go forward. We have a number of slides, but if you have questions along the way, please let me know, and we'll be happy to pause and respond to those. What we're hoping to cover today is we're going to talk a little bit about the council goal as well as our approach to how we address that in the bike ped strategy, and talk about some of the kind of key pieces in there, and then also talk about the next steps going forward for the implementation of it as well. So as Councilmember Winterstein mentioned, that there was a city goal that was established for 2013, and this is an excerpt from that goal that talks about what was intended with all of that. And there's a few kind of key things that pop out of that. One was it's clearly a focus on non-motorized mobility and transportation, but really aiming for a more robust and action-oriented plan, one that would animate what we have in the community and making it more active and visible and forward-thinking, focusing on all ages' abilities, looking at all travel corridors, making connections and linkages to community destinations, to recreation facilities, and also providing some direction for the city in terms of its investments in transportation infrastructure, things like our capital facilities plan, our Complete Streets program, et cetera. So really, again, making it animating those things and focusing on action going forward. How was the goal addressed? One of the key points with this was that we wanted to build upon existing work. There was a body of work in the community. The city has some pieces of a trail network. There are some bike facilities in different locations, but we really wanted to extend the work and fill in some of the gaps and focus on where we can make some improvements to make some connections. So it builds upon things like the comprehensive plan. It looks at travel corridors and completing those sections. And then it also is not just focused on projects, but it includes both program elements as well, because in order to actually have success with the use of you need the infrastructure, but you need the kind of pieces that embody and help to foster that kind of a culture. And that was a part of what we spent some time thinking about and considering as well. And then, as I mentioned, it also provides a specific list of projects and makes some recommendations about policies and programs. So how does this all fit in? A little bit more on that. As I mentioned before, there's kind of a compendium of existing resources. There's kind of a foundation of documents. There is an existing non-motorized piece within the comprehensive plan, but there are some missing pieces to that. There's some great work that's been done with the villages, the city's done with the urban villages, as well as the central Issaquah plan. And really, this is kind of taking some of those pieces and building upon them, focusing on community engagement to help us identify some missing elements that can help to fill in the blanks. And then finally, all these things will roll up into the work that's being done on the comprehensive plan transportation element, which is underway, but will continue into 2015. So in the formation and doing the work on this project, there was a core team that was established, and several of those folks are here tonight, so I want to thank them for all of their work here, including Mary Jo DeBack, Kristen Leeson, Gary Costa, and Ryan and Aaron from Parametrics, who were part of the consultant team. There was also a very large stakeholder group that was convened throughout the process to assist us in providing some guidance, and we're also engaged at various points in the project as well. And so you can't read them there, but they were a part of the effort as well. And so we're going to go into kind of some more specifics about what's included in the document, and I'm going to turn it over to Ryan Abbott's with Parametrics, who is working with us on this project.
Thank you. So in your packages, we included the report, and this report really culminates a lot of the work that we've been doing over the last year and a half. And to walk through, the beginning of it provides an executive summary. The executive summary highlights the council goal, and it summarizes really the three core areas that we focused on, which were projects, policies, and programs. And it identifies costs for the projects and the programs that were recommended, and identifies how the policies will be used. And all of that was really the work that came out of these areas of interest. And when we set up the original sort of process for this project, we engaged the stakeholder team and we said, where do you guys really want to play? What really interests you? Where's your passion when it comes to walking and rolling? And so we divided into these four areas that I'll highlight in a minute, but they really focused on public outreach was one, planning and design was another, engineering, and then how we implement and fund the projects. And then in the appendix, because there was already a great body of work done, we compiled all the existing sources, information, resources that are in the city. We also found very early on that we had very different languages in the way that we spoke to one another about these things. And so we came up with a helpful terms so that we could all get on the same footing, so that when I said a shared use path, we all knew what we were talking about. And really, and the other thing that we included, and I'll get a little bit more into it, is a walking audit that we had a small contract with a nonprofit to help us do. So the first area of interest is the outreach, education, and press, and it's really the one that we said engage. And this area, we held a number of meetings, and they were a ton of fun. Very well attended. We rocked the train depot. We had a whole bunch of people in there, all writing on maps. Really good representation with staff, the public, elected officials. We had walking ambassadors that came out and walked around town to identify where areas of improvement were, and and generating this great culture for walking and wanting to walk. We did a biking audit. So we went out, and I mean, the joke is that fat tires are not needed to get around Issaquah. You can do just fine on a road bike. But this was a really fun exercise to take a bunch of people out and show them where people are like, oh, that's quick. Let's just put a curb ramp in there. But then we had the engineers with us to be, well, that's not really that quick of a thing. So it was this really good educational process that we went through. And the outreach piece, one of the things I really want to highlight is we asked people. And we had little stickers at a lot of the meetings to indicate, how comfortable are you walking and biking? And what we found is that more than half of the cyclists in Issaquah are uncomfortable to cautious when they bike around town, and about a third of those for walkers. And so I guess the mission that we have ahead of us, the objective to make this a really comprehensive and engaged action strategy is difficult when we're looking at all users and all abilities, and that's really what we were focused on doing. And then we asked the public too, and this was really fun, was what's the most needed thing in Issaquah to get you walking and rolling? And we heard many times that it was wayfinding, education, having an ambassador program, really focusing on improving projects in the downtown core and strengthening those community-based connections to the venues that people like to go for when they're biking, like ice cream and bakeries and those types of things. I'm going to go quickly through the next three because we have slides that dive into them in a little more detail. But this was the area of interest that was programs and policy, which is not everyone's forte, but some people love it, right? So it's the same as engineering. And this was really, we had all of the projects and we had all of the engagement. This photo's of the train depot, just to show you how active and busy it was. But this group was really focused on looking at the policies and the programs that we could do to really inspire a culture change, to get more people walking and biking, and then as a city, how do we support the design efforts to implement these projects? And that leads into the technical design and engineering group. This group was tasked with evaluating the design, the implementation, operations and maintenance of existing and innovative walking and rolling enhancement elements that we could evaluate deploying in the city to enhance safety. And ultimately, this group was responsible for developing the concept plans and the cost estimates for the top 10+3, so the 13 projects that came out as the recommendation. And ta-da, the projects. So the top projects were 10+3, and these were the ones. They're not in a rank order, but they were the ones that when we went through an evaluation process, they rose to the top as being these projects that were wanted, and we've identified them working through the city. They're all of the 10+3 are on the capital facility plan, the transportation improvement program, or part of the Complete Streets Fund to implement them. Oops. And then the programs that were recommended, we developed a list of programs as well as cost estimates and what the action items to implement or to act on those would be. And some of the highlights were, one of the top things was a wayfinding plan. Street closures is a broadly defined thing, so here we get into the language issue. It can be something temporary like Salmon Days where we close it for a big event. And then keeping the ambassador program going and following up with encouragement, engagement, and education. And finally, the policy group put together a recommended set of policies, and they really focused on missing or incomplete policies and standards that existed, and recommended some policies that will be considered as part of the transportation element update that's upcoming. And with that, David will discuss integration, implementation, and funding.
Thanks, Ryan. So as Ryan mentioned, all of those, there were kind of the 10+3 kind of initial projects that were identified. There was also kind of a second tier body of work that was developed in part with the work on the traffic non-motorized impact fee assessments, which is currently underway. But they're, essentially the part of the goal was to make this action-oriented, and so that we would have a tool that would help us to move forward and identify both some of those corridor improvements as well as those spot improvements. And there's some recommendations in there as well. At this point, there have been a number of elements that have started to be incorporated into the city's capital facilities plan and the transportation, the transportation plan. And then there are pieces on the policy side that are going to be moving forward as a part of the updates to the transportation element. The council's also, there was some applications that have been made for some grants that are aligned with this, such as a grant to WashDOT for a wayfinding signage plan that was submitted. We won't find out about that until June of next year. It's a very long lead time. But essentially moving into some early adoption or early implementation stages consistent with this. So just kind of as a recap, what are we trying to achieve? We're looking for a safe, a seamless, convenient bike and pedestrian network, one that enhances livability and mobility, one that supports a healthy community, economic vitality, and sustainability objectives for the community. And so really trying to put in place the elements that will help us to move forward and actually go towards implementation with our effort. And then just as an example of something that has been done through some funding out of the Complete Streets project is there's a need for some bike parking and actually incorporating some art into the design of those things. So this is a bike rack, and those have been installed in the downtown area. So some of those early kind of simple things are underway, but clearly there's obviously a lot more to do. With that, we'll take any questions.
Does anybody have any questions for David about the program? Comments? Josh?
In terms of refreshing the information down the road, we went through obviously quite a significant process to put this together, and the projects that have come out of this are what we've seen included in our concurrency proposal as well. So, obviously it's very significant. There may be other projects. In fact, just at infrastructure last week, we talked about pedestrian crossings of State Route 900 that were not included in this plan, but nonetheless came up during the discussion of the Rowley Development Agreement and were of significant interest and may perhaps get included for the concurrency plan or not. But at some point, there may be a need for refreshing the information or expanding on it. Does that effort require simply an update in your opinion? Do we have to go through this process again? What form would that take to take another look at this down the road? And how long in the future do you think we would need to?
Thank you. So I think that's an excellent question. Really with the focus on this is we didn't want to produce a plan that just got adopted, sat on the shelf, and had to wait 6 years to be updated. Really, we built on some existing work and tried to make it focused towards action. So we collected a lot of data, a lot of comments from the community, and they helped us to identify things that we didn't see in our current plans. And so that was a great effort. And I think to truly be successful as we're going to build, education and encouragement and programs and fill in gaps, the needs will change. And so I think it is something that will have to be refreshed periodically. As the city moves forward with some of its transportation element updates, some of those things have more durability. So some of the policies and some of the standards that can be employed with the streets, some of the projects that are identified with the concurrency discussions. If the concurrency projects are on a regular cycle, they could be updated through that process. So I think I don't have a specific time frame, but I think it just needs to be regular enough so that we're capturing the improvements and the changes in the community. But it would need to be refreshed periodically. Probably not on this level of effort because we have a good foundation to work from, but to kind of continue to be proactive in looking at the system, a refresh would certainly be needed.
Nina? And then Tola.
Thank you. Thank you, David.
Sure.
This was really great reading. I loved it. It's a wonderful, robust. It's beautiful and nicely organized for us. It takes so much information, and I really appreciate the effort that went into organizing it so somebody could digest it and then somebody could go back and refer to it in the future. So I really appreciate the report. And I had just a couple questions as a bicyclist and a walker. I'm keenly interested in both sides of this, and I know that there are a lot of things that are like, wow, I wish I'd thought of that, and then a couple things I said, well, I wouldn't do it that way, but you had so many minds in it, and I know it's a work in progress, and it continues to improve over time. But there were a couple things I wanted you to clarify for me tonight that are more big picture. One was that on page 14 of the packet, where it has priority funding and staffing recommendations, recommendation 1, 2, 3, number 1 being maintain the core mobility team, 2, establish grant matching reserve fund, and then increase budget allocated to complete streets, blah, blah, blah. You know where I am?
Yes.
Page 14 of your piece.
Yes.
Page 20 of the packet. And where we have dollar amounts assigned to projects and we have dollar amounts assigned to programs, I don't know how to understand the cost that may be associated with these priority funding and staffing recommendations.
Okay. All right. Is this the page you're looking at?
Yeah, it says A, period, priority funding and staffing. Is that where you are? And they're grayed out. The first recommendation is maintain core mobility team.
Oh, okay.
So how do we evaluate what costs these parts might?
So some of these recommendations are, what we found was important for this this effort was, and we kind of coined a new term, I think, which was plan engineering, and it was kind of that intersection of planning and engineering for actually implementation. And one of the things that is critical to this effort is combining all of those talents for engineering design and urban design and the needed element of programs all together to have some success. And that requires dialogue, and it's a different kind of dedication to just kind of continuing that dialogue going forward. So some of these things like that's what the core mobility team is all about. And so that's an internal structure and organization for a way in which we carry forward in doing the work for the city and designing and looking at projects. So that's really, I think, a functional arrangement more than a dollar cost directly in that kind of a way. If you go to the other recommendations on the programs and policy list, there are some estimated costs with some of those things, and there's a wide range, even if you look at the programs, for example, on if you were to implement a closed streets kind of a project, you can imagine that there's a wide range. An example of that is in Seattle, they have Bicycle Sundays program in some streets, which allows families to get out and use streets uninhibited. But there's costs associated with closing those streets. And so it really gets down to kind of some details at some point about what the specific project is and whether there are costs associated with it. So they're kind of planning level estimates.
On the project, priority project list and the executive summary that has the dollar values on the right-hand column of cost estimates, top 10 priority projects, and that is page 22 of the packet and 18 of your document. No, yeah. On the right-hand side, cost estimate, is that the cost estimate of this particular bike ped part of the project or of the corridor that's being upgraded?
So I will ask, so we have some of the folks who worked with us on this team, and so maybe I can ask either Gary or Ryan to help answer that question.
Gary Costa, Transportation Manager. Those are the actual costs of the projects, the total cost of the project. So in other words, number 2 is the Northwest Gilman Front Street Bike Lanes and Sidewalk Project. That would be the total cost of $772,000 to design and construct the bike lanes on Gilman from Front Street to basically the XXX driveway.
So Gary, can I ask, so here's an example in there, the number 5, of course, the example I always want to look at is East Sunset. Is that, so we have East Sunset, a holistic project for that street, and so this is saying that 6 million is the cost of just putting a cycle track down the side of,
No, that's for the total project on the East Sunset Way project. That
Okay.
includes cycle tracks.
including cycle tracks, including sidewalks and the
Right.
road and everything?
Right.
Okay, so this doesn't tell us how much the bike ped part of it costs, it's how much the whole
No,
thing
not that
costs?
particular.
Okay,
Right.
okay, that's what I
Okay.
wanted to know there. And then,
For some of the projects, it does, but it gets really tricky to split out specifically what is just the bike ped improvement. Because on some roads, especially depending on what the existing drainage is, I mean, if we're gonna do anything that impacts it, we'll have to improve that as part of the project. And then, for the cycle track, for example, a lot of those projects, it's engineering judgment, but depending on the existing road profile and how good the existing road is, it would be, we wouldn't just come in and improve half of it, because there would be conveyance and stormwater conveyance on the other side, so it would need to be considered as a holistic project. And so for some of those projects, it's really tough to split out just what you would do for bike ped, and they really do need that corridor approach.
yeah, okay. Good. And then, that's it. That's it. I just want to thank you for that. And the maps, I love the maps the best. The feedback and stakeholder, even mapping that was just incredible. Really love the report. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Tola.
Thank you, Paul. So a couple of things that came up at Land and Shore a couple of weeks ago that I assume this is done, but there were a couple of things that we were looking for. This issue of the split, you see a total of the recommended $30 million or $27 million, whatever. But as has already been mentioned, only some of that is the bike ped side of it. So I think that where bike ped only represents a fraction of a piece of cost, I think to at least get rough estimates of how much of that is the bike ped piece, so that we're not saying that this is a $30 million package just for the bike ped. The other one had to do with regional connections and how regional connections are described in here. I think it's incredibly important. This is a wonderful. There was a wonderful outreach to our community, and I see that there are some regional partners represented there as well. But I feel like it's unclear to me as I look at this which they go to great lengths to call out where existing versus proposed trails are, but the regional connection is all one color. And then there's sort of a footnote that says, oh, by the way, some of the regional connections don't exist. And so when I, as an elected, look at where to spend money, some of these sort of leap out more than others. Sunset Way is an obvious one, even though it's not a regional connector. It represents, it would represent a major link between a couple of different connections, whereas there are a number of these that parallel regional connections. And it's not as obvious to me why that is as good of a potential investment of our money. And then there are others that look like they are part of completing the regional connections, which seem like they'd be incredibly vital. So it creates a certain amount of confusion to me as to which parts of this go into the regional effort and which parts do not, and what the price tags are associated with that. So as we move forward, I hope that we'll be able to have more clarity that way, so when it comes time to decide which things to fund, we can prioritize amongst this list. These are all great suggestions, but the ones that augment gaps in the regional seem like they would have a different level of priority than things that are, for instance, paralleling regional paths.
Great. I think part of that, that's a great suggestion. And I think there was not the attempt to prioritize at that kind of a level. So there's a fuller list of projects that are part of the TIP, the Transportation Improvement Program. And so I would think that need to be balanced against those other priorities. And really, I think the reference to that some pieces are not fully in place. So there are segments of the East Lake Sammamish Trail, for example, that are not complete. And there are plans that are much longer range on going down State Route 900, but that's way down the road. So that's an example of a piece that's not complete. But certainly in north-south and in east-west, there's the Mountains of Sound Greenway Trail, and then the connector to Issaquah Hobart, and then up north to the East Lake Sammamish Trail are the primary corridors. So for regional connections.
And if I could just follow it up with one last question, one that jumps out at me that represents a quarter of that entire cost is what's identified as number 9, which is East Lake Sammamish Park bike lanes. A lot of that seems to parallel the county trail that already exists or is very near to it. So to have it be a quarter of the total cost, can you explain that to me?
I'll ask Gary to speak to that.
The East Lake Sam Parkway Trail consists of adding additional lane on East Lake Sam Parkway, so the majority, a large amount of the cost is adding additional 11-foot travel lane for vehicles. Then we have sidewalks that we're adding, landscaping, and then bike lanes. Even though there is a trail, but that trail gets further and further away from East Lake Sam Parkway as you go south. And so we heard a lot of hardcore riders really rather have a bike lane. And since we had a bike lane on the other side of the road, we're just mirror imaging that on the facility.
Okay. Thank you.
Anybody else? So I could talk with you about this all day, but we're about up on our time. I do want to highlight one thing. Later on this evening on the agenda, we're going to be getting a presentation on tourism. And there's a lot of overlap, I think, in goals and objectives that we'll be discussing related to tourism. There's also one key word in here that overlaps quite a bit. It's called wayfinding. And on my simple way of looking at it, that as we move forward with both of these plans, should ever anything, and I hope something material comes out of that particular topic, that I'd be looking for some type of convergence between what's presented here and any type of wayfinding that we consider for tourism.
Absolutely. I think the last thing we would want to do with any kind of signage program or wayfinding is have competing palettes or inconsistent signage. And so that would definitely need to be considered in parallel or in connection, I should say.
Okay.
So.
If there are no more questions, thank you, David. Thank you, Ryan. Thanks to the members of your staff and all the team and all of the stakeholders throughout the city and from the region, all the partners that you list within the document for their participation. I can commit to you that this is not going to go on the shelf. I personally will be taking a deep interest in many of these proposals and programs. I know all of us will be seeing parts of these in the comprehensive plan, in the transportation improvement program elements as well. So thank you very much. I believe this is really just the beginning. Thanks for your work.
Great. Thank you, and thanks to the team as well.
Now, just coincidentally, next on our agenda is a presentation of the tourism plan. And Andrea Snyder from our Economic Development Department, an Economic Development Manager, and Matt Bott from the Greater Issaquah Chamber of Commerce are our presenters. We've got you down for 20 minutes, and I'm sure we're going to take that full time. Over to you, Andrea.
Thank you very much. So some of you may have already seen the previous Roger Brooks community presentations on tourism that went over some of the details or went over some of the recommendations. If you are expecting that kind of a razzle-dazzle show this evening, I'm sorry to tell you, but you might be a little disappointed. But we do have those on tape, so we can definitely connect you with those if you wanted to see all of the bells and whistles of the presentation. Instead, tonight we're going to be a little bit more succinct, and we're going to have a little bit more focus on some of the details. So what we are going to talk about is the background. So how did we get here today and wanting to take a look at our tourism and some of the things that we could do in our city about tourism. We also are going to take a look at some of the questions that we were hoping to address and that we have answered throughout this process. And then at that point, I'm going to hand it over to Matt Bott with the Chamber, the Issaquah Chamber, to go over some of the recommendations from Roger Brooks and also the next 24 months of implementation that we've figured out so far. So let's take a little look at the background and how we got here today. We've had actually a lot of efforts throughout the years in tourism. We have many tourism amenities such as Boehm's Chocolates, the history museums, the fish hatchery, of course, the Cougar Mountain Museum. We have actually a ton of tourism amenities, and many of these assets have been doing a lot of their own marketing throughout the years, sometimes partly funded through lodging tax dollars. But there's been really little coordination amongst these groups to attract people to Issaquah. They've been kind of one-offing it on their own. And we have had past attempts to form a tourism organization in our city over the past couple of years. And this is something that the hoteliers have, of course, voiced their strong support and continued support for some sort of organization or entity that focuses on tourism. And in responding to some of those efforts, the Chamber actually formed a tourism committee that invited members from the Issaquah tourism industry, so including all of our amenities and organizations. And they've been meeting for the past couple of years and working on this idea of a tourism organization, as well as some other things that we can do in our community to attract more tourists. So throughout all of those efforts, we were left with a couple of questions, and we'll get to those in a second. But basically, throughout that process, we realized that there's some questions that we needed some help answering, and that basically we wanted to find out. We wanted a tourism business plan or some sort of organizational business plan to help guide these efforts. And so some of the questions that we needed help answering was, does a tourism organization even make sense for a city like ours? Does having that kind of focus on tourism make sense for Issaquah? And then if so, what does this organization look like in terms of governance? So is it part of the chamber? Is it something that the city focuses on? Is it a new organization totally independent of those two things? So we needed help to really answer those questions. And also, what if we did have this organization, what should its focus be in order to be successful? And I think there was a lot of discussion about this, but what we were hoping for was that expert outside opinion who's had lots of experience in other communities to really help shed some light on some of these questions for us. And so that's when we decided to go forward and issue out an RFQ. And this is where the Chamber and the city had a great partnership to achieve this goal. Of course, there was some funding from the city and from LTAC, as you can see. And also the Chamber provided quite a bit of in-kind support. They actually managed the project, which is why Matt Bott is taking the bulk of this presentation today. So with that note on our partnership, I will hand it over to him.
Thank you, Andrea. Good evening, members of the council. Let me start off by saying thank you for this partnership. One we're really excited to be working with you on, and I want to thank the very talented city staff and Andrea specifically for the support and help there, and as well as Bob and for his help, and the council for your work with us on this important piece. So why is the chamber interested in this? We just felt like this was sort of an idea whose time has come. There's been a lot of efforts over the past half decade or so on this topic, and we thought there's more we could get from a more coordinated effort. We just needed to figure out how that would work and such. So so the process started about 2 years ago as we decided that we needed to do more in this area. A steering committee was formed out of sort of the tourism committee. The tourism committee was chamber members and non-members and everyone you would expect within the community to be interested in this. Out of that, a steering committee formed with Eileen Barber, chair of the lodging tax committee, Andrea as part of the city's economic development staff, myself from the chamber, the downtown association, Will Parkinson from representing hotels, and then Robin Barfoot, formerly of the Cougar Mountain Zoo, participated in sort of the steering effort of this. As the consultant was hired after the RFQ went out and the particular consultant that was hired was selected out of 4 that came in, there was some work that took place in public, the 2 presentations that some of you came to, but there was a host of work that happened sort of behind the scenes, and I'll talk about that. That included a handful of meetings with the consultants, some conference calls, but really the bulk of it was organizing over 50 community stakeholders. Anybody who touches a visitor in any form, whether it's Swedish, whether it's an event that comes to Issaquah, whether it's the Cougar Mountain Zoo or Boehm's Chocolates, or where we had a big restaurant group. We brought those folks together to meet with the consultant over the course of 3 days, and then a whole bunch of follow-up phone calls, which is where the bulk of the work took place, just the consultant coming in and listening to their take on this. And then the steering committee worked to guide the process from there. So in answering kind of the first question of is there more in this particular economic development strategy, is there more we could do, we learned from the consultant and from the report that the answer is absolutely yes. There's more that we could do in tourism, and why it's important is that, and I think as you've heard from the presentations and hopefully took from the deliverable, was it's really an opportunity for us to make a great first impression and stand out in the region. Everybody coming to Issaquah, whether it's potential business or potential new resident, comes here first as a visitor. So what can we do to make sure that that's a positive experience and they're welcomed in with open arms? And the chamber specifically felt strong about the third piece, is that in sort of the community's new economic development world, with a commission and a fantastic department and just to focus on that, this was a piece that the chamber could help out with. Providing support and service to the community, and we kind of looked at it like low-hanging fruit. We have neighbors that have done this very well, and it's time for us to really move this forward. The goal of this, and I think this needs to be very clear, and as we've learned from the presentation, is it's really about bringing in dollars to the community. That's what this strategy is about, and it's doing so with a minimal impact to infrastructure as possible. It's to identify niche opportunities, it's to build off our existing assets and support our iconic businesses and nonprofits. And as you would imagine, it really helps with job growth at all wage levels, all across the spectrum. So we thought that was important. So the first recommendation was something that, while we felt that this would come up, we didn't realize how important it was. And that was a recommendation to talk about the importance of developing a brand for the community, a brand that's built organically from the existing assets of the community and strategically developed within our sort of positioning. We learned that that's really an iterative process, and there are 4 or 5 communities in Washington that really do this every year, it seems, and we've got some good case studies to look at and see how they've done it. The brand development work really guides how you spend your product development and your advertising dollars. So it's making sure we're competing effectively and remaining focused. You've heard a lot about we can't be all things to all people, and every town claims to be a great place to live, work, and play. Well, this was really an eye-opener for us to realize how important this brand development process is. And it really does require choices to say we're going to be known as this kind of community and not water ourselves down in terms of our marketing and our brand. This was also an eye-opener and something we learned sort of outside the scope of the RFQ and the tourism business plan, was that the communities who do this really well, their brand works both for business recruitment and for tourism recruitment, tourism development, visitor recruitment. It also works well for community pride. So one message, one brand statement that works for all 3 of those and complements each other. And there's some great examples out there that we learned about. And as we asked for, what's an expected return of doing this? What have you seen in other communities of our size when you engage in this type of work? And kind of on the low end, the number thrown out was 30% increase in visitor spending if done correctly. So if we focus these existing dollars plus some one-time investments correctly, we should be able to see pretty substantial increases in visitor spending, and that's net new dollars to our community. That's why we think this is so important. So really the first recommendation was this really needs to be guided by a destination marketing organization, or a DMO. And as we've learned, that's really the new term in the industry for a convention and visitors bureau. You think, well, how many conventions are coming to Issaquah? And you'd be surprised how many small groups do come to Issaquah and stay here for a weekend to meet because of some of our competitiveness in terms of pricing, parking, traffic. We've got some good groups coming in here using our facilities, using our hotels and restaurants that are really really putting us on the map. So a destination marketing organization that's standalone, it's not part of the chamber, it's not part of the city, it's its own 501c3 is what was recommended. It would have its own board, and the board would be made up of the lodging tax committee and some other tourism experts from the community. And I think you'd be real pleased to know that there are a number of regional tourism experts that live in Issaquah that I think will be interested in serving on this board. And these are folks who do work around the nation in tourism that we could grab and put on this committee. It needs to be private sector led. It draws in tourism experts within the community, as I mentioned, and it eventually transitions the duties from the visitor center currently to this DMO, to this destination marketing organization, and I'll talk about that further in a few minutes. So the recommendation was to form that in 2015. Start that out, and that group would require sort of all the administrative work to get the 501c3 set up, and then the onboarding of the board members. A second recommendation was to hire a contracted tourism director. That position would not be a staff position. It would be a contract that exists between the Visit Issaquah Destination Marketing Organization and the contractor, whoever that would be. The lodging tax funds would be what funds that, but I think the recommendation was only go into that cost when ready. There's a lot of groundwork to do, so before you take on that $60,000 to $70,000 cost within LTAC dollars, wait till you're ready, and then when everything's in place, then make that higher. The duty would be to manage the destination marketing organization, the visitor information center, and engage with community partners on opportunities. The largest opportunity that was identified by the consultant is recruiting new events to Issaquah. So requiring minimal sort of organization work, reaching out to groups who are looking for places to hold conventions and meetings and bring those events here. It's just net new dollars to the community with really minimal work. So all that's needed is somebody to coordinate that work. So going into that further, there are some examples that have taken place recently that I think can point to this. Down at the bottom you see the Northwest Paddle Festival and then the Washington Organics and Recycling Association's annual meeting. Those were some events when we piloted this effort. We said, let's see if we can grab these groups, bring them here and see if this works. So those were two examples that thousands of dollars were brought into the community just by making a few phone calls, putting people in touch with other folks locally, and making it happen. There's some great things out there, such as host at home kind of campaigns where you ask folks in the community who are part of organizations around the West, ask them to bring in their trade association to Issaquah and stuff like that. So there's great opportunities there. Developing restaurant entertainment packages for folks who are here. So when a conference comes to Issaquah that we find out about, how do we get them into the Village Theater, into our restaurants? So doing all that work is what this director would do. Another recommendation was establishing policies on advertising and funding, and this is something that would take place after the branding work is done, and would really guide how you switch from, especially as the lodging tax fund grows with the new hotel, how you allocate your dollars effectively in sort of today's climate. So you see a strong focus on digital and web, some public relations, and then a little bit of print to drive visibility to the website. And again, that director and contractor would work pretty closely with our local amenities to just sync all that together so there's no overlap and everything's maximized. There was quite a bit of language and recommendations about identifying anchor amenities and promoting those, and then using that to benefit from sort of spillovers. So an example of this, just to give you a little vignette, something that we've already started is obviously one of our assets sort of in collective is our family outdoor activities in Issaquah. And here's three off the top of my head. There's Fox Hollow Farm, which gets over 10,000 visitors a year, about 2 miles from here. There's the fish hatchery and the zoo. So those 3 things are outdoor, environmentally friendly, environmentally focused, natural, amenity focused, family activities, that if we can promote that as an itinerary, come to Issaquah for a day and do all this work together, I think that's an opportunity to develop. So promoting our anchor tenants and our sort of best of Issaquah was another piece. Another recommendation was looking at the lodging tax fund, not really as a grant fund any further, as it has been in the future, or in the past, and looking at more as economic development investments. So things like wayfinding signage and brand development programs are really what those funds are intended to focus on. Work is already underway on that. The state law has changed a little bit in the last couple of years, and so I think you'd be pleased to know that I think the community is kind of ahead of this recommendation already. So, wayfinding signage was another piece, and this was kind of an eye-opener as well. I'll give you some quick examples here. But the number 18% increase in retail sales was thrown out, and that's a pretty substantial number. That came from the consultant. So even if we benefited from a quarter of that, just from a one-time investment in wayfinding signs, that's both vehicular facing, pedestrian facing, and bicycle facing, that's a great opportunity for us. And I think that as we've sort of learned more about this, I think that's going to really, I think we're really due for that. And we're looking forward to discussing how that works. Here's some quick examples so we know what we're talking about. So directions to the hospital, the library, historic downtown, things like that. And obviously the way that, as was explained to us in the business plan, is you want to begin planning for this without developing the actual signs until you have your branding done. And when the branding work is done, as you can see some of the logo work and coloration and stuff, then it syncs together. So this is a 2 or 3 year project. Depending on how fast the Lodging Tax Committee would like to move forward with these recommendations, you could sort of start banking some of the dollars there, so you build up a fund to pay for this, and that's all discussed in the business plan. There was a recommendation there about the Visitor Information Center, and this is really interesting too. The recommendation was move the visitor services to within a retail area, likely downtown, though they also talked about Gilman Village. So the thought there is that once visitors get out of their car, you want them to stay there and not have to drive around and park again. And I thought that made a lot of sense. So looking at places like the Hailstone Feed Store, which I know has been looked at in the past, which is obviously right across from the Village Theater, that makes a lot of sense. Also, I think what makes a lot of sense is looking at the sort of the traveling kiosks. And there's some pictures here I'll share of some of these. So these could be designed by local organizations. We could do some fundraising for them to get these put around the community. There you see Banff there. That's obviously a temporary one that could go, in our case, Lake Sammamish State Park or some other areas, to just go where the visitors are. I think just to go back to this real quick, the current visitor center location really isn't in the best area because of how the crazy way you have to get there. So that is something that I think should be discussed within the next couple years. There are some things that we would need to talk through about ADA access and trailer parking and front street traffic, frankly, to make sure that we're thinking about the visitor as they come into town, and they have a good experience and they can easily get to the visitor center and then get out and shop for a couple hours. So I think there's some good discussion that would need to come forward from there.
Sorry, Matt, I didn't get that.
Whoa. Okay. So another recommendation, and how am I doing on time, by the way? Almost done here? A final recommendation, and I think we only got 1 or 2 slides left, is once branding and product development is done, begin to implement that plan. So again, that's something both the hotels, the private sector, the restaurants, possibly the school district, the hospital, the chamber would participate in. This is truly a partnership. But we must have that brand direction first, and that's what we learned is pretty critical. There was a recommendation in there, should the council decide it needed further information on a summit for city council and staff on additional questions regarding LTAC. The consultant wanted to make himself available to you should you feel that was necessary. And so just in summary of all these items, then here's sort of a quick snapshot of the next 2 years. 2015, established Visit Issaquah, which would take a little bit of scope of work, probably a 5 or 6 month process to recruit the board, train them, get them up to speed. Fund and begin the brand development work. Again, that can be paid all or in part by lodging tax, and depending on how far we want to go with a consultant there. And then start to phase down the lodging tax fund from a grant fund to more of an economic development sort of investment fund, and make sure that that work is coordinated with this plan. And then 2016 is when we recommend hiring the tourism director. And again, this would be the Visit Issaquah organization hiring a tourism contractor to do that work, to begin that event recruitment and further coordination of these activities. Begin to implement the brand action plan, make the VIC changes, and then hopefully by that time there'll be an opportunity to continue with wayfinding work. So this, in summary, I would say, again, this should be a phased approach, 2 or 3 years. We are very fortunate to have another hotel coming online, which I think would increase the lodging tax fund by maybe 20–30%, who knows, but that's a good thing. The steering committee, which I sort of described earlier, will continue to stay engaged in the process. And again, this is an investment in the community. This is something that other communities do in partnership, public, private sector. And we are grateful for the opportunity to serve and work with you on this. And if you have any questions, if there's time, I'd be happy to answer. And sorry about
Matt,
that.
you still have time for us, or do you have to go?
I'm good.
Okay. Does anybody have questions for Matt? Tola.
Why is there a recommendation to set up a entirely separate organization from the chamber?
I think it's a statement of sort of this work evolving in the community. I think if the question were asked 10, 15 years ago, they'd probably recommend that it be under the chamber, I would think. But I think they realized that there's enough assets here that it could stand alone. From what I've gathered out there with communities who've done this, this is not an uncommon path where the chamber kind of does this work for a while and then says, you know, this is growing so big it can stand alone. There could be shared, I mean, there could be overlap in some areas, and there probably will be when it comes to festivals and things like that. But I think that my read on, to answer that question, is that it's just sort of a natural evolution of a sort of a spin-off, I guess is the best way to put it, of what we do now, but it could be done much more if it was focused under one board who could just focus on tourism versus, in the chamber's case, focusing on tourism and 7 other things. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Nina?
Thank you. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Andrea. I went to both of those splashy presentations. They were pretty awesome. And it's great to see the information less clouded by the Hollywoodness of those and then just the real nuts and bolts. So I appreciate it. It wasn't a disappointment. That's what I wanted. And I really liked how you closed, because I was kind of leaning that way, of having a city council staff summit, because many of the questions I have are too technical for this setting here, about how the city engages in this, what is our role, you know, where's the overlap, and to find out where those things are. Also the transition of the lodging tax, what is the oversight on that process as it changes from doing one thing to doing another. You know, I think that's kind of complicated stuff. I think it'll be really interesting to talk about. But as encouragement, one of the examples that Roger Brooks brought to his last presentation was the city of Oak Harbor, which I'm intimate with, having grown up in Langley. And I used to go to Oak Harbor to go shopping. And boy, it was not a destination except that it had a few more stores than Freeland. But now, wow, it is awesome. And the reason I bring it up today is that as looking at it from a city official, all the way down to the manhole covers, that brand was everywhere. And I thought it was awesome because you're talking about tourism as importing dollars into the city, but I also see it as a way to keep dollars in the city, civic pride, all sorts of things hang upon this in a really positive and exponentially growing way that I just hope that this all works out the way that we want it to. So I'm looking forward to working with you more, and I'll save my specific questions for the summit. Thank you.
Mary Lou?
Matt, I just had some general questions about LTAC funding, because that's not something I'm completely familiar with. But is the phasing that you show in the plan lining up with changes to the fund and increases in the fund, or is the phasing still require other sources of money to be put in to make it all work?
I think it depends. I think it depends on, there's a couple big sort of nuts to crack as far as in the recommendations. One of them is the branding plan. How much does it cost to do that work? And when is the right time to do that work, since it's important to correspond with business recruitment kind of initiatives, sector analysis, and what does that tell us about who we should go after? I think all that needs to come together. As we asked that question of the consultant, I think what we learned is that this work could be done without a consultant or very minimal involvement from a consultant, or it could be done completely with a consultant I think they said $70,000 was sort of what other communities sort of pay for this. And so I think as it relates to your question on lodging tax, how that works, I think it depends on the phasing down of it being grant funds and phasing up of it going to major one-time investments like contracting for wayfinding signage or developing a branding plan. That would need to, I think, you would just need to see that happen over 2 or 3 years. And again, the good thing is that the fund is expected to grow, so it wouldn't be a complete, that would allow for, I think, a good 2 or 3 year phase-in process. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. I'm just wondering if just to carry this out in the way you've laid it out here, do you need other money?
The short answer is probably.
Okay.
And that's actually what I wanted to add to your response, Matt, was just that we discussed funding a lot throughout this project, noting that there's a lot of projects and recommendations that were discussed for us. So, but I think the good news is that there are other potential sources of funding. One, for example, there are different types of grants we could go for wayfinding. So it doesn't necessarily all need to be reliant on lodging tax dollars, which I think is a good thing, because to implement a wayfinding plan starts to get pretty pricey depending on what the community wants. So I think that there's other sources of funding, and one thing that our hotels have said is that depending on how the group is going, and if they decide that they want extra things done in the scope of work for the destination marketing organization, that might be something that they would be able to chip in to do. Also, in the very fine details of the plan, Roger Brooks recommends some sort of revenue generating activities that the organization could undergo, so they could start raising their own funds. But one of the things that they made very clear, I think, in their recommendations was that the Visit Issaquah organization should not be a membership organization the way that the Chamber is a membership organization, so that they could, the Visit Issaquah organization could promote certain businesses and not necessarily be beholden to its membership base. So he suggested different ways of raising that revenue and generating it in addition to the LTAC dollars.
Just a final add-on on that. Doing some research in other communities and what they've done, I think once some of those other institutions I mentioned, once the case is made about how important this is, I think the ask is much easier to ask for one-time funds or ongoing funds. For example, just a quick example would be Skagit Valley has a tourism promotion area with 5 cities, and they have a public relations sort of fund that about 20 different groups pay into every year, and that's their marketing. That's their marketing fund all year. So I think there's some great opportunities there, and a tourism promotion area as well, which is something that is a couple years down the road. This is the first piece, but that opens up some funding opportunities with other communities, I think, once the case is made here.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to move our agenda along. Thanks for the presentation, Andrea, Matt. Thank you very much. Thanks for questions from the council. Next on our agenda is an Economic Vitality Commission report. And it says it's being presented by Keith, but that doesn't look like Keith. Yeah, don't pay no attention.
And actually, it's going to be Carl. So it starts with a K. So thanks for having us here today. And so I will actually just pass the mic over to our chair of our EVC, Carl Lay, to talk more about the Economic Vitality Strategic Plan.
Thank you very much. Good evening. What Matt said. Thank you very much. No, actually, it's interesting going through this and seeing some of the things that we're doing and some of our points that intersect nicely with what Matt and some other things are doing. I always like, as being a resident and working on things, seeing things come to life, looking at the signs of Ellensburg, which I was just in this weekend, and using those as wayfinding is pretty exciting. I'm here to talk primarily about our strategic plan, the elements of it, and to give you an update on how it's come about and where we're going. So hopefully that's of interest to you. First thing is the inputs. So you look at the middle here with the strategic plan in the middle, using the comp plan. The SWOT is a strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats that the commission worked on over the last, I guess, close to 2 years now, sort of pulling that together. The task force plan is the 2006 and 2007 plan that was put together about economic vitality. Central Issaquah plan you're obviously familiar with, and new work plans that come about, and intersecting those with things that Matt is talking about. Another way to think of our strategic plan, when you see all these things pointing in, now visualize something in the middle with a bunch of things pointing out. Because one of the key things about the strategic plan, it's not just for the Economic Vitality Commission or the Economic Vitality Department, but other things, other teams pick up work streams. So things will go to the Chamber of Commerce and things will go to DIA and other departments and activities within the city. So that's important to keep in mind. The things on the left-hand side, the little flower diagram, if you will, are the main focus areas that we worked on as part of the SWOT planning and the output of that, and the things that we thought were important when we considered economic vitality in the city. So you can see things like incentives and the community and whatnot, and move those over to the right hand, and they became the 4 major goal areas within the plan itself, and that's what we'll dive into is each of those specific areas. Now help me out here. Jen, they've received a lot of this as pre-read. They have some things, okay.
The larger, they actually have the implementation table,
okay.
which has all the details, including the action steps, which we won't go through today, but we can answer questions about. And
one of the things as I was looking through here is just the individual points and thinking about these and what are the key words since you have these as pre-read. And those 4 areas to me add up to essentially, create the business environment, create that infrastructure, begin to market that infrastructure, and then the last 2 goals are really what do we already have in Issaquah that we want to foster, maintain going forward that will support the first 2 elements of the plan. So the first one here is build a successful business environment. It's a place where businesses want to thrive, and if you were to pick out a key word for each of these, it would be services, transportation, infrastructure, and processes. So the business services that are required to bring someone in, are we looking at the things that will attract and retain the businesses we have? That's a thing that you'll see as a common thread throughout the plan here. What are we doing, not only bring people in, but what are we doing to support the businesses that are here? Are we looking at retail leakage that we have? Do we want to change that? Do we want to change the mix, et cetera? Transportation, obviously that comes up when you're talking almost anything about the city of Issaquah. How are we taking advantage of the I-90 corridor? How are we connecting to other municipalities within the area? So what are we doing that will make that part of how we're looking at economic vitality? Do we have the utility and the infrastructure assets to do that? So are we looking at how the power grid works, which is obviously not something the economic department's going to worry about, but we're going to work with local power authorities to make sure that we have a power grid that supports the type of industries that we have in Issaquah. And last on this goal is look at the processes. One thing that came up in our analysis was looking at what is the permitting and what do you have to do to file taxes and do different things within the city. So making that easier and less burdensome on our employers here. And then the second, and this goes along a little bit I think with what Matt was talking about, is promoting the value proposition. The first 2 here, if you look at the business value proposition and targeted marketing, are primarily, to me, focused around the sector analysis that we're working on and got funding for. And I asked Jim before we started, I said, where would you say we are in the development of this plan? And I threw out 25, 30%, and she sort of gulped and choked and said, no, I think we're 90%. And I said, but a lot of what we're doing hinges on doing a proper sector analysis. So we need to know what types of businesses we can attract, how we can work within the city, and that would underpin one of the main things. If you're going to talk about what your value proposition is to bring businesses in, and you want to target the right types of businesses, you have to know what you have and what you want to go after and what makes sense for the economic vitality of the city. So that's why we got in this argument. I think that's such an important thing that we've undertaken to do that. And then diversifying the economy and the businesses here so that right now we're very retail-oriented. We have a couple large employers or one main large employer. How do we diversify that to remain and improve our vitality? And then the last one, again, Matt alluded to this a little bit, I think, the private investments in the highest and best use developments. We're looking at anchor projects. We're looking at what we can do within the city to do more compelling things. One of the things that we'll do at the next meeting is really consider a specific anchor project and what are the kinds of ideas that we have around that. So it's not like we have one in line. We need to think of one we need to create. And that can be public-private ventures and different things. So very compelling idea. And so I said the last two are really about supporting what we already have in Issaquah and the types of things that will, again, attract and retain those employers. And the first one is here about the higher education institutions. We have Bellevue College coming online. We have our school district here. We have Issaquah School District. We have Issaquah School Foundations. We'd like to attract another 4-year program and attract the kinds of programs that will support the employers that want to be here and the ones that are already here. So looking holistically at what we need to do there. And then the third and the last one on this particular goal is looking at the ability for employees to live in this area. I've likened us, as Nina knows, I'm a sailor, and you live around here, and you go into Oak Harbor, and you're very concerned about the tides coming in and out. I sort of feel like that's what Issaquah is. In the morning, there's a big tide of cars out, and there's a big rush of people coming into work here. In the afternoon, it's the other thing, conflicting. And that just creates a lot of turbulence for us. We'd be much better off if we had more opportunities for people who worked here to live here and vice versa. And the last is a vibrant community. This is one of the things that's exciting about living in Issaquah. Do we have, can we develop the museum with the 3 things that Matt talked about? The cultural activities, if you're in Issaquah today, for a day, here are 3 exciting things to go see. We have the Downtown Issaquah Association. We have the Art Walk. We have the Art Center down there. Making those a core part of what we're talking about, because it's not just coming here because we have great places to live and beautiful vistas. We want exciting things and interesting things to do while we're here. The awareness and access to outdoor recreation opportunities, I think, is key. Again, the presentation I walked in on where you walk and bike. I'm a biker. I'm a runner around here. I love the facilities that we have and the ability to do that. But we've also looked at ourselves as sort of a gateway to the Cascades, if you will. We're one of the entry and exit points to be able to get to our natural resources. So that's something that we could take advantage of. And then the last one, you were talking, I think someone earlier mentioned the Raleigh Development Agreement. One of the things that was exciting about that when we looked at that in the Urban Village Development Commission was all that mixed use, the entertainment, dining, shopping, and moving that throughout Issaquah makes us a much better place to live. The staff is working on bringing back to the commission the metrics. We've talked about what we would like to see because a lot of these I think are fairly nebulous. So what are some things that you can look if you if you think of a plan? I learned when you do strategic planning, you sort of have mission, objective, strategy, and tactics. Well, you need to be able to measure what you're looking at so that you know that you're doing the right things. So that's sort of the next place we are so that we can report those back not only to the commission but to the council. And then this is what the plan looks like. These are the tasks that Jen was talking about. Think of this as the 4-year plan moving across, so 15 through 18. And within those goals, having different work and task items. Not everything gets done necessarily immediately. Not everything gets done necessarily in those 4 years. But it's a planful approach to the things that we need to do. And more importantly, I think how they intersect with each other. So the next steps is working back on that ginormous Gantt chart that you just saw, finalizing the comp plan. As I mentioned, the sector analysis I think is very important, and going on with reporting back on our progress. I moved through that very quickly because I knew that you had pre-reads and fairly easy things. Any questions?
I'm not seeing any.
Speechless.
That was such a good presentation. I do have one question. So, boy, tonight we've already heard about, the bike and ped plan, and there's follow-up and there's things to do. And we heard about tourism, and there's follow-up and there's things to do. And we heard about economic development, and there's follow-up and things to do. Keith, you own this one, right?
We all do.
No, I mean, in more seriousness, I mean, we're just piling on ourselves right here, a bigger list, a to-do list. And so Carl, on your previous slide, I love plans that span 4 years and fit on one slide. That's good.
With all the detail.
Yeah.
These letters are just hard.
Are we in the blue zone or the white zone? But just in all seriousness, I mean, could you speak to what's it going to take? What type of resources? I mean, what's going to have to change from our existing work plan, organization, focus to execute on this plan?
I thought I was just going to get to sit in the audience and eat popcorn. Drink coffee. Good thing I had some coffee. So I think it's a great question. And the reason why we chose to do a strategic plan is the concern over getting things done and tracking our progress. And the strategic plan was the best tool that we could think of to actually chart out our next 4 years. And I think that what was important was to actually get a number of things that we want to accomplish and actually dedicate some resources to it. So between myself and Andrea and Jen, we really kind of divvied up the work tasks, and we're going to make sure that we make progress on all of them. In addition, the tourism, and in addition, all the other things that we're talking about, they all need to happen. We're very busy, but that's good.
So in a way, you can look up there and see your next, some of the big blocks and your work plans for the next 4 years.
Absolutely. So each one of these there's actually a lot of blue lines here that all merge together. Each one of those represents the action steps associated with the goals. So we have been working as a staff to actually put together the action items for each of the strategies, and then we're planning to provide updates to the council at our quarterly services meeting to kind of share with you guys how we're doing on implementing the strategic plan. So we're in the process right now of doing all the tangible pieces, and then it's going to be show and tell time.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, Nina, go.
Thank you, Paul. And I appreciate your question, too, because it kind of goes to my question I had about the bike ped plan. There are all these things that had to do with staffing, and I wonder, well, who's going to do that and when? It's more stuff. But here I also see a lot of overlap, like you said, between 3 major presentations tonight, and one big example is wayfinding. So I think our big task is how to make sure we don't step on each other's toes and rather get the stuff done efficiently, get each of these things done, and not all of us do all of them. And how to do that, I'm not sure. We're going to have this summit, though, with the tourism people. Maybe we can figure it out then.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for that presentation. Next on our agenda, from the Parks Department, it's a rental facilities report. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Ross.
Welcome, Brian and Ross.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Good evening. I'm Brian Bernson with the Parks and Recreation Department. With me tonight is Ann McGill and Ross Hoover. In March of 2013, at the request of council, park staff presented a rental division report on Tibbetts Creek Manor and Pickering Barn. Following the presentation and during the budget discussions, council asked that staff present another report during the third quarter of 2014. I'm here tonight to update you on the status of Tibbetts Creek Manor and Pickering Barn facility rentals. We appreciate the opportunity to present this information to you this evening, so thank you. The manor was purchased in 1988 with a voter-approved park bond for $620,000. It opened on February 1st of 1989. It is a 7,000 square foot facility located on 3 acres alongside Tibbetts Creek. This facility is primarily used for rentals. Here we have an overhead view of Tibbetts Creek Manor. It's located next to Tibbetts Valley Park, right there adjacent to it. It's also, the site is also very close to the Central Issaquah Plan, which, as we know, will have some, bless you, double on that one, which is also located next to the Central Issaquah Plan, which is going to have some tremendous future growth. Here we have a little bit of a closer overhead view. You can see the house right there, and that other block is a storage barn. In between those two is the Tibbetts Creek, and there are 75 parking spaces on this site, with overflow parking available at Tibbetts Valley Park, which is just a short walk north. There's also, in the bottom right-hand corner here, there's a sediment pond, which is a public works operation facility. Rentals are categorized into 3 categories: commercial, nonprofit, and city events. Some examples of the commercial events are weddings, corporate meetings and banquets, anniversaries and birthday parties, and memorial services. Some examples of our nonprofit events are Issaquah Women's Club, Issaquah Garden Club, Issaquah Rotary, Issaquah School District and PTSA, Food Bank, Leo, and church events. Some examples of city events are city functions, staff meetings, community meetings, HR trainings, park department programs, and day camps. Here's a graph showing the value given back to the community through nonprofit pricing and city uses. The majority of the bookings at Tibbetts Creek Manor are for weddings and receptions. Staff estimate that it accounts for about 70% of our bookings. As you can see from this slide, the revenues at Tibbetts Creek Manor have been trending upward the past couple of years. 2015 is projected to be as strong, if not stronger, than 2014. A few items to note about the annual revenue and expenses are: in 2014, the Manor began to recognize the insurance expense for the facility. In 2013, the Manor began to recognize the utilities expenses for the facilities, which was a billing that used to come out of the facilities maintenance division. In 2013, 50% of the administrative assistant's salary expense was put into the Pickering Barn budget to accurately reflect the position, the duties that that position performs within that division, working with the farmers market, Pickering Barn bookings, and assisting in the rentals of that facility.
Brian?
Yeah.
What do you think is the cause for the growth in revenue?
You know, I can only say that we've talked about it back, and I knew you were going to hit me with that one too, just the economy. You know, we sort of came later when the economy was downturning. It took us a little bit longer, but then, as you guys know, we came last time, the Manor did take a pretty good dip. And it's climbing back up. Like you see, the past couple of years, 13 and 14 have looked much better, and 15's looking good too. So
there hasn't been any specific type of advertisement or campaign or marketing campaign to increase visibility and the availability of the resource.
No, we have. We've been doing the same, advertising and distribution we've done in the past. We have tried to reach to as many markets as we can. It is nice that we haven't had some of the, for a while there, we were dealing with some projects that were going along SR 900. So there's some roadway work there that was, and I do believe it did hinder us a little bit, just because when people were visiting the site, they would see the construction, and that wasn't the first thing you wanted to see when you're thinking about your big day. And so for a little while now, we haven't had much activity, and we've had that improved roadway that looks much nicer. And things are picking up a bit economically. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Thanks. 2 things. One, on the 2014, are those projected revenues and expenses?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct, but they're pretty close because people book a year to 2 years out. They're very close to spot on. The fluctuation, there's going to be very little.
And that was going to lead me to my next question, which is, weddings are usually booked well in advance, so presumably we already know into 2015. Can we ascertain then whether bookings are up relative to previous years so that we might expect the 2015 projected revenues to continue that trend line?
Yes, I would say yes. Right now, we're looking very strong, as good if not better than this year.
Thank you.
Yeah. Capacity is one of the biggest challenges facing the Manor. The Manor is booked most Friday through Sundays, June through September. This is primarily due to the better weather and the increase in capacity that's available by using the deck outside of the facility. The Manor is able to accommodate 175 guests when utilizing the deck. Without the deck, the Manor can accommodate 130 guests. The Great Room alone can accommodate 96 guests. This is the number of guests we can put in one room for a celebration. That would be the big space right up there that's the Great Room. So that's, you can put 96, roughly 100 people in one room for any activity. A lot of times we get more people put in here, but they sort of get a shot through the double doors at the big space. Hiring a professional consultant to determine the best and highest use for this facility would be recommended. A professional consultant would be able to provide the guidance in determining whether or not it would be wise to make an investment in renovating the Manor. Some of the things that could be considered in order to increase the capacity are, and these are just things that we're throwing out that could be considered, is increasing the Great Room by combining the rooms on the first floor and moving the kitchen and its current location out into the garage. Now, I mean, these are just brainstorms of staff, and once again, discussing it with a professional would be something interesting. But we have, if you look here, I'm going to use a little bit of a pointer here, but like some of these walls we have here and here, if you could open up this into a greater space, which is what we hear from renters regularly, that our space just isn't big enough to accommodate that one large room feel. That's one of the challenges we're up against with that facility. Another one would be to replace the outdoor tent with a structure that would accommodate year-round use. You know, having a facility out there that we can maybe use year-round and have climate-controlled area out there. Renovating the kitchen that would include a little bit more robust kitchen area with warming ovens, sinks, commercial refrigerators, and prep areas. Once again, these are not inexpensive things I'm suggesting, and which is why we believe it would be wise to seek, you know, a consultant to determine whether or not that would be feasible or not. Here we have some pictures of the barn that is located on the same side as the Manor. This has park maintenance equipment supplies that are used for the care and maintenance of Tibbetts Valley Park, as well as some of the city surplus supplies. Here we have a list of comparables sites within Issaquah. You know, this is understanding the Manor is a unique entity and location all in and of itself. But this just gives you a little taste of what is out around, nearly around us that's similar. Where you have the Hilton Garden Inn that can hold up to 200 people, Holiday Inn 120, Blakely Hall 250, Gibson Hall 70, and the Tibbetts Creek Manor, you know, we can accommodate 130 inside or 175 including the outside area. And with the theme of tonight's, mostly of the agenda, economic development, the events and rentals of the Manor, they do have a rippling effect throughout the community. You know, on this slide we have some of the businesses, vendors, and caterers that benefit from the activities held at the Manor. So, you know, when people do have activities, weddings, receptions there, people are staying in the hotels, they're buying from the restaurants, and they're shopping and getting their goods here. Next, we're going to be moving on to Pickering Barn. Is there anything I can clarify on Tibbetts Creek Manor?
Absolutely, Mary Lou, go ahead.
So, Brian, do you have any idea what it would cost to have a consultant come in and look at it?
You know, I was trying to figure that one out. I'd have to research and get back to you on that one. I don't want to just throw out a number without being sure about that one. I think we'd probably have to do an RFP to see what we would, you know, what it would come back at.
Okay, and assuming that that's something that happens next year, are there any costs that need to be paid to do maintenance or major repairs on it, even while you're studying what the highest and best use of it could be?
Well, right now we've been able to cover that within our operating budget. Okay. All the, you know, the smaller stuff, the stuff that was being suggested here and that we're talking about with the consultant will be much larger ticket items. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Pickering Farm dates back to the mid-1800s and changed ownership many times. 1993, a portion of the land, including the 2 barns, garage, and 9 acres of land, were donated to the city by the Langley Associates. The Eco Center project was then proposed and later abandoned. Then in 1996, the Blue Ribbon Committee formed and proposed the Squaw Valley Homestead project, and it too was later abandoned. Finally, in 1999, City Council initiated a short and long-term plan process, which was adopted in 2000 and included the use of Pickering Barn as a rental facility operated by the Parks and Recreation Department. Here we have an overhead view of Pickering Barn. Pickering Barn is located next to Costco and along the Issaquah Creek. This site is located within the Central Issaquah Plan, which again is destined for significant growth in the future. As with the manor, the barn is home to a variety of events, some of which are listed for you here on this slide, and again broken into 3 categories mentioned earlier. Here's a graph showing the value given back to the community through nonprofit pricing and city uses.
Excuse me, Brian. I'm not sure I know what you mean by given back to the city.
That would be through with our local nonprofits, the normal rate it's half the normal rate given to our local nonprofits, which was been mandated since the beginning, since we opened. So the local nonprofits pay half of full rate. And then the city uses that are held for city functions and events are at no cost because those are city sponsored. Which is why 2010 is quite a bit higher one year. That year we ran day camps out of the barn, and that was the value that, had that been charged, that was the value of that time. But we have so much going on at the barn, it really made the day camps very hard to run.
So since it blends city use of its own facility along with use of the facility by nonprofits, what's the purpose of this information? What do you want me to see in that information?
It's just that had those full rates been charged to any of those users, that's what would have been recognized, including ourselves. Had we had to pay a full rate for the use of that type of facility, that's what would have been recognized.
I would just add, I think he's trying to recognize the economic value, which is real. I mean, if we were booking this as real cash, you would book this on the, on the accounts. But since it's technically a donation to the city or to those nonprofits at a lower rate, there's value to it, but it's just not booked on the city's books.
Yeah, I mean, the city charging itself to use its own facility, I don't know why that would be. I'm not sure how I see the value there, but I understand your words. Thank you.
Okay. The majority of the bookings at Pickering Barn, as with the manor, are weddings and receptions. And the staff estimate that this accounts for roughly 90% of the overall bookings at the Pickering Barn. Pickering Farm is home to the Issaquah Farmers Market. The Issaquah Farmers Market runs from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. every Saturday from mid-April through mid-October. The last market for 2014 will be October 11th. So get your farm fresh produce now. As you can see from the slide, the revenues are strong. 2015 is projected to be as strong as 2014. It was really interesting when I was reading through the plan that was adopted in 2000. The revenue projections in that plan for 2010 were $109,000. In that business plan that they did in 2000, and in 2010 we did $383,000 in revenue, which far exceeds that expectation. A few items to note about the revenues and expenses are similar to Tibbetts Creek Manor, where it started recognizing the insurance and the utility costs, as well as that 50% of that admin assistance position was now attributed to this budget instead of the Tibbetts Creek Manor. The barn's weekend bookings are nearly at capacity year-round. The barn is booked the majority of Friday through Sundays year-round through 2015, There are some Fridays and Sundays available in January and February. There's some availability Tuesday through Thursdays, as Mondays are usually the day that we use for cleaning the facility from the heavy use. The barn is able to accommodate 400 guests. Hired a professional consultant to evaluate and determine what could be done would be recommended for this facility as well. I think you could probably combine those two if we were to move forward with that on both facilities. Some of the things that could be considered here, and these are things that we hear from renters that they would like to have and see, are a permanent heating system for the hay barn, air conditioning throughout the facility, built-in sound system, restroom in the dressing rooms, kitchen renovation are just some of those items. Here we have comparable sites near Issaquah. Again, the barn's pretty unique in the manner of just what it is and where it's located, you know. Maidenbower Center can accommodate 400 people. Bellevue College up to 500. And then we have Pickering Barn that can accommodate 400. And as with Tibbetts Creek Manor, events and rentals of the barn also have a rippling effect throughout the community. On this slide, we've listed some of the business, vendors, and caterers that benefit from the activities that have been held at the barn. And that'll be it. Thank you.
Questions from the council?
Yeah.
Tola.
I have a question. On the manor, what are our options beyond renovating? I notice, I think it's on now parkland, right?
Yeah, that is all parkland, yeah.
So if we wanted to, for instance, privatize it, is that an option?
That is up to, we're open to whatever our administration leadership provides for us. I
Well,
mean,
once it's parkland, that's, I'm asking sort of, given that it's parkland, does that constrain us?
I believe that would be an acceptable use if this.
You have a bunch of options. So, everything from just doing a land lease, to the building, for whatever use that may be, to entering into a partnership with a caterer to rent and run the facility as a rental. So, you really don't have any restrictions on the use of the building. There may be some restrictions on the land itself, since there was park bond funds that were utilized for that. But I know there's going to be a report coming out later this year on a partnership with some of the tennis groups in that area. And so, as the council gets that report, there may be some additional options that you may want to look at with the building itself.
I see. Thank you.
Sure, Joss.
The parking situation at the manor, how does that play out when we have a significant event there? Because you had mentioned it holds about 130 guests.
Correct.
And I'm guessing you can't get, well, you certainly can't get 130 cars. I'm not even sure you can get 65 cars in there, even if 2 were coming in each car. And there's really not a lot of other good places along 900 to park. There's no street parking,
Correct.
certainly. The barn, there's obviously the new garage that's, I've used for the farmer's market, and that's great. They're sharing that with us to use. But how do we get people in and out of the manor? It's a little tricky there on 900 trying to get in and out of that place.
Yeah, the beauty's been that, can I take you back to a slide here real fast? And I'll run you. Because I know you're familiar with the Tibbetts Valley Park Field 5 right here. We have the parking lot here. And then you have the Metro parking ride parking here, and we have a maintenance trail that is used for a lot of people coming through, which avoids going down the SR 900. It's not a huge walk. It's not a super duper short walk, but it's a short walk. And unfortunately, our activities tend to be on off hours when those lots have a little bit more space in them. They're nights and weekends. And that's where you do have more availability in those other parking lots.
I remember him mentioning there were 75 parking stalls there as well. So, Nina?
Thank you, Brian. I just wanted to go back to the maybe hiring a consultant to update Tibbetts Valley and the manor. And when I look at the report that we have in our packet and some of the things that you've said, I haven't heard why you would. Is there, we're having an increase in our revenues, and I haven't, and you were thinking about using the consultant over at Pickering, and Pickering is 90% booked on the weekends year-round. I'm thinking, well, then what's the problem? Because if there's not a problem, if it's being fully used, why would we change it?
No, great question. And not arguing one way or the other on that one, just with the manor, we've had before the manor, kitchen renovation and a variety of other options that we've talked about in the past. And in further discussions along those lines, just in discussing it, was that it'd be wise before we sink any amount of dollars into that to seek a professional consultant to actually do an assessment to see if those would have value to do. Because if they don't, we really shouldn't be doing it and spending a little bit of money to find out whether there is a greater value, or to spend a little money to find out that there's no value. And then while they're doing that, you could also tie in the barn, which if we can bring the more amenities you can have at the barn via air conditioning, heating, well, that all makes you more marketable, which also gives you the ability to charge a little bit higher rate based on what's out there, and the amenities you provide affect the rates as well there. But to have somebody that actually really knows that industry and knows facilities would be not a bad option of going before spending a large chunk of money to really do a major renovation. At least that was the thought behind that.
Mary Lou.
Brian, can you put the slide back up that had the barn costs and revenues?
Yeah, I like that one.
And I did hear you. Yeah, that's nice. I did hear you make a comment about the 1 year where the cost of half the cost of the administrative assistant was added back in. But between 2010 and 2014, the costs have jumped by over $100,000 to run that. So what's in there besides just that admin cost?
Well, with the increased bookings over that time, too, is a lot of part-time non-regulars. And no major, we work a lot of our general maintenance into the budget as well. And as the facility gets older, we haven't, in all the years since 2000, there's been no major amounts of money put back into. So the barn's been running that kind of revenue. No major amount has been put back into it, other than within our operating budget, we are able to keep things running in that capacity. But we don't have enough money to actually do some of the bigger things, like the heating and the air conditioning and whatnot.
So back in 2010, it just wasn't costing that much time and labor for maintenance, but now, 4 years later, it is costing a significant amount more?
I could get you an actual breakdown on why, but I'm
just curious. It just seemed like a big jump.
Well, earlier it was also mentioned, as with the manor, that there's the cost of utilities was being now charged.
Right.
It wasn't recognized, more of a.
Still, the jump in this one is.
Yeah, but there were two items. There was there was some the insurance
staff,
and utilities.
Staff.
Yeah. Did I get that right?
Absolutely correct. Insurance, utilities, and that half a salary.
Okay.
So I can't wait to see the chart where utilities and insurance go down somewhere to offset this increase.
I guess, Brian, if that's the answer, I don't need to see other detail. If there's more to the answer, I guess I'd like to hear the rest of the story, if there's more to the story.
I believe that's all, but I'll double check, and if there's more, I'll get back to you.
Great.
Tolan?
One of my questions a number of years ago, I was on services and safety, and there were a number of capital projects associated with the manor that came before us. Is there a current backlog on the capital list for things on the manor, and how much is that backlog in dollars?
I don't know. We have a backlog. I think through all that discussion that we went through with I believe the process and the process we go through here really leads to better things. And I think part of that is leading to actually seeking out a professional to guide us in what is needed there. And that's where, like I said, this is the first time we've ever even brought up the consultant piece of, once again, it's just an idea, but with all those backlog of ideas, to actually have somebody that has a professional knowledge in this industry say, these things will have value and these things will increase your marketability and generate more rentals at the manor, before we actually dive in with just things that we hear people saying that they'd really like to hear.
But it wasn't just new ideas for how to make the manor better. It was things like a tent,
Yep.
And it was a surprisingly large amount of money to.
It was $25,000, I believe, for a new tent.
So are there a bunch of things like that that are deferred maintenance things out there for the manor currently?
That was the biggest deferred maintenance piece. And over the years, we've bought sections of tent to, I think pretty much now, I think we might have a new tent in varying pieces. We're very creative in Parks and Recreation. So that was to replace the whole tent at one time. And over time, we have, because we've had to replace pieces as we could and make them work.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Josh?
You know, the charts you had with the comparison to other facilities, those were interesting. You know, I never think of the barn and Maidenbower Center as having similar capacities. That's really interesting. I'd be interested to know, and you don't have to provide it tonight unless you know offhand, but maybe you could provide it at a later time to us. Pricing-wise, what about our facilities is comparable? In other words, we know space-wise we can accommodate 400 to 500 in the barn and about 130 to 175 in the manor. And you gave us other locations like Hilton Garden Inn and other places around the city or outside the city. But we're talking about what makes it attractive to increase rentals, and pricing is certainly a consideration. And so if you can get 400 people in Pickering Barn versus 400 people in Maidenbower, but it's only half the cost, is that driving people here? Is that beneficial? Do we need to look at a cost pricing adjustment? Where's the tipping point? Is that going to scare people away if the cost goes up, or is it simply going to raise revenue because things are so strong people want to come there? That cost analysis is interesting, and any data that you have on that would be very informative.
Yeah, we've done a lot of research, and every year our staff in the rental division go out and they once again, it's not apples to apples because we're talking about a beautiful barn on a tremendous piece of property right across from Costco in downtown Issaquah. I mean, it's a pretty unique facility in and of itself. As far as the market's concerned, it would be medium high. Like you go to a Maidenbower is on the higher end, but they have a lot more amenities there as well. There's a lot more bells and whistles at a location like that. The barn also falls into a bit of a thing that's a little bit trendy right now. Getting married in barns is very, very popular right now and has been for a significant amount of time. So we found that is unique in and of itself. So by comparing ourselves as best we can to other entities, we're not at the cutting edge pricing, but medium high is where I would say we sit as far as the pricing. We can get you some pricing comparisons if you'd like. Absolutely.
You're talking my song here. You know what might simplify this, because the apples to oranges, it's not even just apples to oranges, it's apples to asparagus. There's just such variation, and it's so tricky because of the way venues charge for different things, like food, or chairs, or plates.
Well, the industry, I love that, because some do. They say you can rent from us, but we're going to provide all your food and your drink, whereas we allow people to bring in their own caterers and their own, and they like that freedom.
Which is priceless. So you could, the best you could do is run a scenario of some kind that shows the difference in values, because we can't understand those things unless you just run a scenario. But it would be interesting, and just to know where we lie in that, so we know where we could go as far as these investments. Yeah. I appreciate it. Thanks, Josh.
So scenarios as far as that, what I'm hearing is comparisons to other sites and sort of what they charge and where we sit in comparison to those, right? Yeah.
TOLA has a tiny item.
I beg your forgiveness for a third comment, but I just want to expand on that thing about the barn offers a unique capability in the city, and I think your list of comparisons here points it out. For years and years, I was involved with the auction at IVE, and it was really important to us to do the auction in Issaquah. And we didn't want to go to Maidenbower, or we didn't want to go, someplace outside of Issaquah. And the barn is really the only place you can do it. And it's a great facility. And I think you also point out there are, the manor is a little bit different, right? Since the manor has been acquired, we now have Blakely Hall, we now have Hilton Garden Inn. A lot of events occur at those places, but the barn really does offer a unique service that makes it sort of in a special category, so we can keep these events here in Issaquah. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian. Thank you for
Thank
the
you.
presentation. Thank you, everyone, for your questions. Next on our agenda is regional reports and activities. And we do this at our regular meetings as well, so it's really the same report. But tonight, one little difference. I know that Mary Lou has some things around EFR we're going to discuss, and we're going to actually save that one for last. So we'll start with Nina.
Thanks, Paul. I just want to report to you briefly, and I'll have more information in the coming weeks on the Cascade Water Alliance, where I serve as the alternate to Mayor Butler, and I also serve on the Resource Management Committee. And it's a really exciting time for Cascade Water Alliance. A couple months ago, I told you that the Alliance is embarking on a historic drawdown of Lake Tapps, which is our future alternate water resource for the region, not just for us. And this is to conduct major repairs and improvements and upgrades in Lake Tapps. This just doesn't happen. If you had a helicopter, please go fly over it. By Thanksgiving, it's going to be back to its 4 lakes earlier configuration, not just one large reservoir. I could go on and on, of course I won't, but it is very exciting, and I look forward to telling you more about it. Another thing that's coming up on the board agenda next week is the approval of the upcoming budget. Working very hard and have positive things to say about costs and costs to our citizens. I think it's all working out very well as far as budgeting, and we'll have the final on that very soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Mary Lou, do you have anything other than EFR?
Nope.
Okay. Tola?
No report.
Josh?
Thank you. I met with Chair John Stillen of the Eastside Transportation Partnership and former chair, or chair emeritus, Bernie Talmas, the mayor of Woodinville, as part of our leadership committee for ETP. And we're going to be looking at augmenting our procedures. And actually, this is probably more of interest to Stacy and Fred, who aren't here. But we're looking at extending our meeting time from 7:30 to 9:30 in the morning instead of ending at 9, as we have been for the last many, many years that I've been on the partnership, to allow for greater discussion and opportunity to review issues at ETP meetings. We're going to have at our next meeting, the second Friday in October, an update from the Puget Sound Regional Council and some other items of discussion. We're also in the process of forming committees, leadership committee, planning committee, and a legislative action committee that will help bring ETP into greater prominence back to our glory days of the partnership many years ago. So all of that came out of our vision and mission retreat that we had a while back, which was very productive. And that's it for my report. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I have no regional report myself, so I'm going to go back to Mary Lou for Eastside Fire and Rescue. And if you're wondering why I'm standing here, is that she's put together a few PowerPoint slides, but I have to show them. Mary Lou needs me to show them.
Thanks, Paul. So we do have Wes Collins and Greg Tryon here from Eastside Fire and Rescue tonight as well. I'm doing a very brief recap of a couple of meetings that have happened recently for Eastside Fire and Rescue. One is the newly formed Operations Committee, which did a detailed drill down into the proposed budget. And the second is a Finance Committee meeting that occurred after that, which I did not attend, and we don't have Eileen this evening, so I have some draft minutes I can share, or we may be able to get an update from Wes or someone else that was there. And also the date of the upcoming board meeting, because Eastside Fire and Rescue Board will be voting on this budget. So there were a couple of issues that I thought Eileen and I should be getting some feedback from you on.
So before we proceed, and at our Committee of the Whole work session earlier this month, we also had a presentation.
Yes.
Greg Tryon gave us a presentation, and this item is getting a little bit more attention this evening because it's very clear to us that this council's awareness and opportunity to give guidance to our members, Mary Lou and Eileen, who sit on the EFR board, and allow them and enable them to speak with the backing of this council on items, I think is very critical. These are issues that are before them now. I think we all recognize that Eastside Fire and Rescue is, if not the largest, is a significant portion of our budget, and I think this council and Issaquah Council in general, having greater visibility and familiarity with, and the opportunity to give guidance to our board members is an essential practice.
Thanks, Paul. The first slide is just sort of a recap of what we're looking at for this year, and it's just the Issaquah partner contribution portion. Showing a partner operation contribution of $5.8 million, and equipment fund replacement contribution of $370,000, and a capital facility maintenance fund contribution of $48,000. The total for Issaquah for next year would be $6,216,000. That's a significant increase actually for next year of $572,000 and change, or 10% over 2014. And most of this has to do with the relocation or the construction of the Maple Valley Station and the reallocation and funding mechanism under the ILA. So it's a really big jump for Issaquah. And I just wanted to make sure you guys were aware of that and get your opinion on a few things that we may be voting on the board.
Hey, before we go on real quick, I know you said Maple Valley Station, but it's station number
8.
Okay, I don't know the number, but it was along State Route 900. It's now been moved to May Valley.
May Valley.
Right, okay.
You're right. Thanks for the correction.
Okay, 10% increase, 10.5.
Yes. So at this point, I'm going to look to my notes. I did not attend the Operations Committee meeting on August 25th, but our financial officer for the city did. Diane was there, and they dug down into a lot of issues and came back with some recommendations on a few things, and those are ones that I'd like to get your comments on later. I was going to have Eileen do the Finance Committee, but I guess we'll deal with that one when we get to it. So the Operations Committee was formed this year, and they looked at a proposed 2015 budget, which has a 2.79% increase over 2014. They did see a cost savings that was shown in there. It's included in the increase, but there was a look at the administrative staffing and a reduction of 2.2 positions. That is already included, though, in our new budget, which has the 2.79% increase. They looked at professional services, which is a $500,000 line item, and it was broken down into several categories. Some of the items will not get looked at this year, but the Operations Committee is recommending looking at things like whether or not information technology should be contracted out or stay inside. That's something they're going to look at in 2015 for the potential impact in 2016. One of the other items that they looked at or talked about was medical insurance benefits. They were suggesting that if spouses are covered, have insurance through their place of employment, that they should be removed, that the insurance coverage should be removed from Eastside Fire and Rescue. It's called dual coverage. So it's when a firefighter or a fire chief and his spouse both work and both have health insurance coverage, should the benefits be paid by both, since the costs aren't claimed under both plans, or should the spouse's coverage be with their work and the employees be with theirs? And Diane may be able to fill in more on this, but it's a federal way provision is what I was hearing it called when it was discussed. Also, they looked at overtime costs versus new hires, and I don't think this is something that they're talking about for this year's budget. They looked at the communications, which is a really large portion of it. It's an $872,000 line item, and didn't find any items to work on. I'm going to skip a bunch of the smaller ones that they looked at, but there are a few ideas they have for looking at efficiencies for next year, and I'm going to jump to some new initiatives that are included in the budget. Purchase of ballistic vests, $75,000 for all stations and some volunteers. Proposal to purchase power cots, $120,000 for 10 cots for emergency vehicles, a volunteer program training expansion, I think an additional $50,000, and a training facility proposal, which I believe at this point in time is not reflected in the budget, but we'll be getting some study in 2015. Two items that the Operations Committee still is requesting additional information on and looking at is a further breakdown of overtime. So maybe they are trying to look at some savings for this year, but I'm not sure if they're going to be dealing with that at their next meeting or not. And also there were some questions about the shop equipment maintenance contracts. So those were sort of the major items that the Ops Committee was looking at. Just make sure I haven't missed any. So some of the recommendations that they came back to the board with were to evaluate the wage and benefits of the exempt workers, collect some additional information on overtime costs for this year, look at some shop and equipment maintenance costs for this year, and a few items moving forward into 2016. Could you go to the next slide? Oh, actually, Paul, let's talk about what you want to do with the Finance Committee. I mean, I can't report on that. There's some draft minutes out. Wes Collins or Greg Tryon can probably give some more information about what they did. But basically, the way the process worked was this report was given from the Operations Committee to the board and then referred to the Finance Committee for review and discussion. And that was on, I'm not sure of the date, September 16th. So some of these items have been reviewed at the Finance Committee, but the overall budget itself has not. I think it was just questions on approval of ballistic vests, approval of power cots, and approval of training dollars for volunteers.
Yeah, so these are the preliminary notes. I don't think they've been finalized. Greg provided them earlier today, and so the Finance Committee considered all of those proposals, and the notes demonstrate that the committee voted in favor of recommending them as part of the 2015 budget.
But there is no motion to refer the budget back to the board for the October board meeting at this point. So the Finance Committee is not done with the budget. Oh, okay.
Part of the budget process, it automatically comes back to the board in October.
So those who are watching at home couldn't hear that. That was Wes Collins filling in the gap that the proposal from the Finance Committee is going back to the board for the October board meeting.
Okay. Sure. Well, it's up to Paul.
Plenty of room up here. Come on, Wes.
I just wanted to clarify that under those issues, they're not reflected, not all of them are reflected in the 2015 budget.
Right.
The ballistic vest, the recommendation was for it to come out of reserves. And the power cots, it suggested that just be taken care of in the equipment replacement fund. So the only thing that actually hits the operating budget is the $50,400 for the volunteer training.
Okay.
So I just want to make sure you know which funds everything's coming out of.
From the last board meeting, Wes, there was also a referral that the Finance Committee look at the health benefit question. And also there was a suggestion from the Operations Committee chair that the Finance Committee and the board should consider waiving or cutting in half the contribution of several of the partners to the Equipment Replacement Fund for the year 2015 in order to smooth out some of the increases that the City of North Bend and the City of Issaquah are feeling. Did the Finance Committee deal with those two issues?
They did not deal with those issues.
Okay.
So the only thing that, I did do some work on the Equipment Replacement Fund because I know that was brought up, and there is room to freeze it, and that might work, but that saves you about $50,000, which for Issaquah would be about what the budget's going to go up with the volunteer training. I also looked at if you reduced it. There's no way that we could reduce it totally or like not make contributions, but there are places that we could lower the contributions and the fund still stays above water out to 2035. So there are things that we could look at that. I mean, if there was a suggestion that Issaquah was to bring forward, we just know that in 2018 and then out in 2027, there's large purchases, and that's where the fund gets low in its reserves.
Okay. Then Paul, if you want to move on
Thank
to
you,
that
Wes.
last slide, this is the sort of the time for the council then to look at some of these items and provide some input that Eileen and I can take back when the board meets in October.
The next slide, she said.
The next slide. Okay. So one of the items that had been brought up was this healthcare coverage for spouses of exempt workers. And it's where spouses have coverage at their place of employment, should coverage through Eastside Fire and Rescue be eliminated and reflected in the 2015 budget. And if you want, we probably can have our finance director talk to that and how that works in the industry and how that works with government organizations and what are our other partners doing before you give comments?
You know, Mary Lou, one thing there's no numbers here.
Correct. Because it hasn't been looked at.
Okay, and when will that happen?
That's a good question, maybe for Wes, because if the finance committee didn't look at it, we would have, I'm assuming at the next board meeting, bring it up and say somebody should look at it. So it hasn't been looked at. As far as I know, there's no numbers. Wes may have numbers.
Wes, we still have a place for you up here.
I should sit closer. Well, one of the issues with this one is that we're in the middle of bargaining with the labor group.
So I may have this wrong. When I went back and checked with the operations committee, I'm trying to reflect not the bargaining group. So is the bargaining group non-exempt?
Yes, they're non-exempt.
Okay. So
the exempt staff is the 9, basically,
Yes.
the chiefs and the administrative assistant.
Okay,
And
that was what they were
and what we've looked
testing for this year.
right, and what we've looked at with that is it doesn't apply to any of us. So it might apply to one. So it's not a very much money.
It's not a significant amount of money.
Yeah, because I think out of there's 8 of us, and it might apply to one. So you're talking maybe, I don't know, $100, a couple $100 a month max.
So, and as far as a policy decision, if it were to be set as a policy for the exempt staff, it then sets a platform for.
That's what they were discussing, is that we could set up a platform for to jump off of for other labor groups.
So it may not, looking at just the exempt staff, may not generate a significant budget savings, but it may set a direction.
It may.
It may.
But in my experience in negotiations with the labor group, they've used us as an example on a number of cases. Said, hey, we don't want to do that with exempt because we're going to set that for labor. And it hasn't worked. But that doesn't mean next time it might. I mean, we'll always try to negotiate the best deal we can get.
One thing I want to remind everybody too is that we really are not in this session. It's not really appropriate for us to talk about non-exempt right now. So if you got questions, go ahead.
This may be totally out of left field, but I remember a previous discussion that we have fees that the city has collected that have to be used within a specified period of time, I think 6 years. And those fees, I don't know if this sounds like devious accounting, but can these fees, since they're going to expire soon, be used to fund things like this for the partnership, and then the city receives some form of other reimbursement over here as a way of circumventing that 6-year limitation?
No.
No.
We can't?
No. Nice try.
Tola, do you have a question?
No.
Okay. Bob?
Did I hear the assistant chief say that you're doing negotiations this year?
Yes, we have all 3 contracts
Okay.
are open.
So the interesting thing about the healthcare coverage is, not doing double coverage is actually very common in government and in industry, and it really doesn't cost the employee anything, but it does cost the employer a lot because you're paying for that extra benefit of that employer spouse. If you're self-insured, obviously the costs are real. It's whatever's incurred by the spouse of the employee. If you're fully insured, then you're paying. You can save the variance between the cost of a family plan less the spouse and what they would receive at their work. Now there could be some potential impact on the employee if their spouse has lesser coverage at their place of employment than they're receiving through EFR. But on the other hand, it's actually very common in the industry to eliminate that now. That's just as a comment.
Tola?
No.
Yeah, I guess I do. I'm struggling to stay positive on this because really I feel like what I'm hearing is the operations committee was tasked with going to find savings and instead found no savings and more costs, and then asked the finance committee to go look at certain things to try to mitigate some of the financial shock, and the finance committee hasn't done that. And so while I think we have great firefighters, this whole process doesn't sound in the same spirit that, like last year, we as a city came together and made some hard choices, right? The council pushed back on a budget, and the city was able to did a great job in finding ways without having to let anybody go to bring some costs in. And I really hope that through whatever mechanism, we find a way to apply that same rigor here, because the city is facing such a cost shock, and it's just disappointing to hear the status of the discussions. Thank you.
Thanks, Tola.
I would just remind the council that this year we did do a restructure, which 3 positions were decreased in the agency, which decreased our budget by the net of about 200 and some odd thousand. So there are things going, and we are trying to hold down our costs, and we are doing things. And the one thing the operations committee really looked at was they got deep into the budget, and what they said was, without losing programs and people, there's no big savings. There's nothing out there that can be cut. So it would be a reduction in level of service, and that's a board decision whether or not they want to do that.
All right, thank you, Wes. Elaine, Mary Lou.
Sure, I'm just going to continue down my list. I guess my point at the end of this is there's 4 or 5 things that I'm looking for you guys to give Eileen and I guidance on, and maybe it's just a general comment like Tola says that try harder. There could be, but I would like to get them on specific item as well. If there's something on here that you think isn't worth pursuing, please tell me. And if there's something here that you think we should be pursuing that I haven't written on the list, please tell me. That would be helpful. So the first one was this healthcare coverage, and I'm not sure what mechanism to bring this back in, except that it can be brought up at the board meeting, which is in early October. The next one was that there were some new items being added into, and as Wes clarified, ballistic vests and the power cots, they're both coming out of equipment. But I think the point that I'm a little confused about is that they're coming out of the equipment, and it's not the general fund, and they're budgeted for, but I think the board sometimes has a hard time understanding the justification for things. For example, the power cot proposal. I don't think there was a study or data presented that showed that there's these back accidents, and therefore we need to change our equipment, or we need to do retraining to have people prevent the back accidents. So these are in there, and they're items, and they're new, and it's a tough year for us. So is this the year to be adding new things when it's going to be so hard for our city to find money for this line item. The volunteer training program also there is a volunteer training program. This is some additional training. It's $50,000. It's not a large item, but is this the year to expand a training program? There was no report or study that came through showing if we train the volunteers X amount of money, we have a savings on the other side, a cost benefit somehow. That didn't show up, so for me, I have a really hard time with that, especially in this fiscal year. And the training facility is one that I think will reemerge next year. But again, it came about more, I think, from an opportunity of land being available, and there needs to be some actual study into what kind of training are we doing, what is mandatory, what is regulatory, what is the best practice, where are we deficient, and what's going on with our regional partners as well, if there's a gap. So those were some items that I was concerned about in the budget. And the next slide.
Yeah, and just one word of caution, though. I think all of these are these are not bullet point type topics. The ballistic vests, there's quite a there is a reason and there's a story behind them, and I don't feel that I'm in a position to know enough to really give you pointed response, about that. It has come through the finance committee there, and I believe it was discussed there. What I do know is that in the future, our firefighters, our emergency rescue personnel, may currently they're kept out of warm zones where there's potential danger, but in the future, I think that's changing, and they may be asked to come in and perform emergency services and putting themselves in danger. So I know that. That's just an example of a. There's complexities behind it. It's kind of difficult to look at a line item right here
and it would
say
be
yes, no.
appropriate just to say that as far as equipment purchases go, as long as they were anticipated and they're coming out of the equipment fund, we don't have an issue. But maybe the volunteer training program coming out of ops, we do not want to increase our operational budget, and the training facility is just its own thing. So it doesn't have to be bullet by bullet. You can just.
One thing I did hear earlier from Wes was ballistic vests came from reserves. I take that's ending fund balance. So one of the things I've learned in this process is that, and I think you have this on a later slide here.
I have something about policy, but I don't have something about ending fund balance.
No, and I've just jumped ahead right here because I think we want to. Because kind of the issue as I'm beginning to see this is that. I'm not aware of there being a clear set of financial policies used to guide for the formation of the policy for the budget. And so that when a decision about spending unending fund balance, there's clear policy guidance that both the policy setters and those preparing the budget, can look at and make an argument that this is consistent with a budget policy. And I think that's the point of this slide as well, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. So again, to get back to your point about bullet points, maybe it's more of a comment on developing policies around that instead of just saying yes and no on those different items. But and how to spend the ending fund balance is, I'm not sure if there's a policy on that or not, spending it out of reserves.
Yeah, so Wes has another comment?
We have a policy on how to ending fund balance.
Okay, he just mentioned that there is policy on the use of ending fund balance. So, Mary Lou, how do you want to proceed with this?
Yeah, can you go back? Sorry. Okay. So this suggestion that was made from the operations committee about the equipment replacement fund for 2015. Actually, Wes, I'd like to ask you a question about it. I know that Issaquah's contribution is in the 300,000 plus range. Why would the savings only be in the $50,000 range if that were the case?
Well, what we talked about at the last board meeting was that we could freeze the fund at last year's level, not take the 3% increase. That fund tends to go up at about 3% a year. And we could freeze it at last year's contribution, which basically saves $50,608 over this year. So you
I
could,
thought the operations committee was recommending something different. I thought they were saying half the contribution, 50%, waive 50% of the contribution.
they mentioned a number of things. What I did, when I mentioned earlier, I did look at if we funded it $100,000 less, if we funded it $200, if we funded it $300 less, $300,000 less, I'm sorry. I never did the 50% because even if we just funded it $300,000 less than last year's or this year's projected contribution, so instead of $1.3 million, we only put in $1 million, we go negative out in the later years. One of my big goals is never to go negative in the fund, just because it's always hard to do the cash call a few years later. And what I also mentioned to the board was that in 2018 we have some big purchases, and that's where the fund tends to dip very low. And that would be my time. That's when I was planning on a good audit of the plan. And if you can look at after those big purchases that you have extra funds, that's the time to take those funds out and distribute amongst the partners. We did that in 2008. We had that same kind of a dip in the fund where we were going down low, and we noticed because we've saved money on purchases, because we bought a few vehicles for less, because we went out and bought used vehicles. We had about $300,000 extra money, and what we did was we reduced everybody's contribution that year by that $300,000. We could do that. We could take $100,000, $200,000, and the fund doesn't go negative. $300,000, it goes negative. So I think it's a decision the board could make. It could be a recommendation that you could do less, but there's no way we could go 50% contributions and have enough revenue, have enough money for the fund not to go negative.
Okay. And how could we get finance committee to look at that? Just by making a recommendation at the board, referring it back and saying we want you to look at these various options so that they are looking at your numbers that you're producing for the different years?
Yeah, so the way the budget works is finance committee brings it back. Basically, we bring it back to the board October 9th. The board can look at it. They can give any direction they want to give to the finance committee. They can either vote yes on the budget, or they can refer it back and ask the finance committee to look at other items, and that would be one of them that you could have them look at. And then it comes back in November, and pretty much we have to vote for it in November, or we have to have a special meeting in December because we have to prove to NORCOM that we've approved their funding. Anyway, long-winded, but.
Okay. Thank you. And then the last two bullets have to deal more with the current budget, and that was that in the last board meeting, the update that was provided was that if all of the budget items were spent in the 2014 budget as they currently stand, there could be a surplus. Now, there is a line item that has an issue, and what I wanted to get direction from is that there are several options of what to do with that surplus if it does exist, and I think Wes had stated it was in the order of $320,000, and that is distribution back to the membership. And if that's something that you're comfortable saying that we should say okay on, or if that's something you'd like to talk more about when it comes up near the end of the year or the beginning of next year when its books are closed. The last item is the line item that has potential to go over this year and is over, and that is it's on the last slide, the overtime. So currently the overtime budget will run out in early October, and the board last month authorized $10,000 to be spent through to the next board meeting to cover the overrun. And if the overrun continues through the end of the year, I think it's $180,000 that is estimated to run over. And so that is going to be dealt with the board. I thought the finance committee was going to look at that one as well, but I don't think they did. Did they talk about that at the finance committee meeting, Greg?
Regarding specifically this issue?
What to do, what were the other options? Like I thought that was referred back as well, is that we approved $10,000, but then someone go to finance committee and run through what the different options would be, which is continue to pay it, cut back on service, and I don't know what the other options were. But did they do that at the Finance Committee meeting?
No, they didn't. My understanding of the direction was is that's going to be taken up on the October 9th meeting. They were given direction to us, the administration, how to get the agency through to October 9th, and then that decision we would make from the continuing month to month.
So that's a board decision, not a Finance Committee isn't
Affirmative.
looking at options?
Yeah.
Okay. So what are the options?
The options are, we are limited a little bit in that there is a ULP, an unfair labor practice, to avoid a ULP, an agreement that was established. Starting October 15th, the agency, if it determines, there's several things that go on. If there's going to be extra money in the budget, which there isn't, it would then, in a certain procedure, be spread out through the following 3 months or 2.5 months to do staffing. That money is not going to be there. So then the next question is that do we, as an organization, reduce staffing?
Which is what I called a service brownout?
Yes, exactly. So you could reduce a fire station, instead of having a crew that runs an engine and an aid car, would just run an aid car out of it. That's 2 people, so you lose one of the persons in there. You could do that at 2 stations, or you can close a fire station. That's sort of the next level down. And each time that happens, that becomes a question. Are we comfortable closing a station? And there's a process of what 3 stations can be closed, et cetera.
Sure.
I thought we were talking about overtime, not regular staff time, and you're talking about cutting staff. I missed something here. Are we talking about overtime costs are more than they were budgeted for?
The cutting staff thing was on the administrative side, not on the firefighter side. But on the firefighter side, we had some absences that have been backfilled with overtime and some training costs. And Greg, if you want to give a quick breakdown of how that works, you use the overtime for a couple different things. The overtime budget is about
$900,000. $560,000 of it is overtime to maintain staffing. So we make that way that it's better to have overtime instead of overhead. We are at such fine line of minimum staffing that in this particular year, starting in June, July, August, and continuing, we've had 10 people off the line. So you're looking at roughly, a percentage that's causing us to spend extra overtime to maintain staffing. So normally we hit our overtime budget right on or really close. Either we try for just under. This year we've expended it as of today, actually, is what my prediction was going to be. The board directed that we would continue till October 9th, and what we've done is we as an organization assign the budget program managers that they can spend 80% of their budget. The last 20% they have to get approval from the administration for this type of thing, because there's no way to guarantee how many people are going to be sick, have babies, get injured, that type of thing. So we have, yes.
Family leave.
Yes.
Family medical leave.
And like I said, we've had 10 people out on long-term disabilities. One of them we won't get back. We know that. So it's the reason why we hired people. They started in August, but by the time they're available to reduce, and you've heard this from Police Chief Beerbaum, it takes a period of time to get them where they can be of service in reducing the impact.
So at the next board meeting, there isn't going to be there wasn't a review by the Finance Committee, so it's just going to come straight back to the board with here are your options, and then we have to vote on that at the next board meeting, either to extend the funding or to do a service brownout or to close the station.
And we will go through again the presentation that we've done the last 3 years of what that looks like, what the impacts are, what your options are. And typically what has been done in the last few years is, again, make it a month to month. So in October meeting, the board would make the decision to say, we are comfortable doing X, whatever that is. the brownouts, station closures, or we will continue to fund based on what we, the administration, bring to you saying, we've made these cuts in the operating funds, here's the impacts to the operating budget when we do this, but this will maintain staffing.
So just to recap it for the other council members, we're looking at a potential $180,000 overspend on overtime, potential reduction in admin spending of $100,000 to offset that, so a net of at least an $80,000 overtime overrun. But then Wes had also talked about a $320,000 surplus in the ending fund balance at the end of the year. So we would be reducing that by $80,000.
That 300 is of 2013, I believe. It's not the.
He said it was for 2014.
Okay.
So the end of the year.
Okay.
So these are why I'm bringing these back to you. I have some. The budget is going to come to the board on October 8th, recommended by the finance group that we should approve it. It's got a couple of spending questions in there or policy issues, and then there's two current things that we'll be voting on. Oh, sorry, one, which is the overtime thing, which has an impact on the ending fund, the surplus in the ending fund balance. So I just feel like Eileen and I need some direction, especially since it's a significant part of our budget. And I'm not sure, Paul, how you want to facilitate the conversation going forward. Would you like them all to just speak to any point, or do we want to pull a point and talk about it and get some feedback, or how would you like to proceed?
So ideally, at the board meeting, you'd like to be able to say, you have my council, the guidance I got from my council, or the general consensus of the council is.
Yes.
So I think, why don't you just, the areas where you feel you have the greatest need, let's just go through those really quickly.
Okay. Well, if you want to back the slide up for me.
Which one?
Can I get clarification on that?
Sure.
So the cost increase to Issaquah, the $500,000, is that part of your thing? And
that's just there.
That is what it is.
It's already there.
And so that is a non-negotiable.
It's per the terms of the ILA.
Yes, it's there.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I guess first I'd like to see if anybody wants to give feedback on this healthcare coverage for spouses of exempt workers, and whether we believe that this is something that should be done just as a policy decision that could have impacts elsewhere, but is it a direction that we'd like to explore?
Tola?
Yeah, I think it's clear in situations where spouses have coverage under their own healthcare systems. It's
Don't pay twice.
Yeah, don't pay twice. There's no reduction in benefit to the employee. My wife gets coverage at her company, and so why should my company pay for that? So
Okay.
That's my thought.
Anybody else have a
And
comment?
Josh?
I agree.
No brainer?
I don't have a counterpoint to that, so.
Yep. What next, Mary Lou?
Then there's some new spending. It's not significant, but there's some new spending in the budget. One thing out of reserves, which is the ballistic vests, power cots out of an equipment fund, and volunteer training program out of an operational budget. Again, I guess I'm more interested in your policy ideas, or your, how am I saying this right? I guess your ideas around policy, as I am you saying yes and no on particular items. It's the new spending thing that I'm a little bit hung up on. For me personally, this is a tough year for us to endorse any additional spending. Extremely tough year.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Tola.
I'll dive in. So as a policy, I think spending can sort of be broken out into immediate safety-related items, and then you can talk about professional development, and then you can sort of talk about everything else. And I think safety, lives at a separate, stronger level of urgency than the others. I think that professional development, because you want the best of the best, is a little bit higher than the baseline, but the safety one to me is it's just different. Yeah. Thanks.
Anyone else want to provide comments on those?
Again, I think this one is difficult because we don't have the
There's
background
so much
on this
background
particular
here
item.
that you don't have. I get it. I'll go to the next one, which is the waiving or reducing the contributions to the equipment replacement fund. It sounds like the finance committee did not look at this. Is this something we would like to refer back from the board meeting and say we'd like them to at least look at several options here as a cost savings for this year? Tola saying yes. Others?
Yeah, I feel strongly about that for two reasons. Number one, because it's an opportunity and it seems like it can work without compromising the long-term equipment replacement plans. And second, in that it also will help assure, I mean, it gives us a little bit more time and opportunity for you, Mary Lou, to be there when the budget actually is up for a vote in November. I think those are two reasons I'm in favor of that.
Okay. Anything, Josh? Nope. He nodded. He nodded. The last two items, actually, let's just deal with the overtime one. Guidance on overtime, because the ending fund balance surplus we're not going to know about for a while, and I can come back and ask you about that. But what about overtime? Going over the overtime budget, looking at spending the $180,000, 80,000 new, 100,000 in savings, hopefully, or unspent dollars, or service reductions. Thoughts?
Tola?
I think I would be very cautious about any reduction in service. My personal feeling is, from my understanding of EFR, they operate pretty lean in this regards, and I know that conversations in the past about changing level of service have met from, more systematically, have met from a really negative community response. It's unfortunate that it's in the position that it is, that there's this overrun, but I would strongly avoid reductions in service.
So the position would be to approve the overtime on a month-to-month basis as it comes through. That's what you'd be more comfortable with.
Correct.
Okay. Others?
Go ahead, Nina.
I have so little expertise in this that I really only speak to the impression, and I wouldn't be able to offer any advice on how to do this. But it's darn frustrating to think that the solution is to close a station. And like, how did we get here? And so I just want to share that's a frustrating solution to this kind of problem. I think that we need to support the fluctuations in labor costs as things are so variable. But I still I wonder, how did we get here? And I can't help but express the frustration in that. That's all. Thank you.
Anything, Josh?
Yeah, I don't feel qualified to offer an opinion on that particular issue. I mean, I'll just say as an overarching comment, and it really goes with the previous point, that, however we can look at ways to, I'm starting to lose the words, it's getting late, offset, reduce, mitigate our losses as a city, right, that we will be incurring as a result of the additional, or not the additional, but the service changes and so forth that will cause our costs to our citizens to go up. That's very, very important to me. But in terms of internally with respect to the organization managing overtime, I don't like the idea of service brownouts any more than I would with the power company. there's a service and a public good and safety issues have been mentioned, and that's paramount above all else. So, that to me would be bottom of the list. I don't know in terms of quote unquote other ideas, though. I mean, Tola, I think, had a really good suggestion about the sort of take it as it comes analysis, and there may be others as well, but I don't feel qualified to really offer an opinion on that.
That's helpful.
Is there anything else, Eileen? Mary Lou, sorry I did that again. Are you good? Okay, thank you very much. And so we're going to move on past our regional reports and issues. And I want to first thank everybody who's been waiting for the next item. Appreciate your patience with us on this. And thank you, Wes and Greg, for being here and contributing. So after all that excitement, I want to announce that the next item on the agenda is executive session. So an executive session has been scheduled to discuss collective bargaining negotiations per RCW 42.30.40, paragraph 4B. This item is expected to take approximately 30 minutes with no action to follow. The council committee work session is now recessed and into executive session at 9:26 p.m. So Bob's going to turn off the sound equipment, post the door, and monitor the clock.